Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Tonight, the broadcast explores Glasgow's Gideon Keys, which are a number of weird areas, artifacts, and personalities in the city of Glasgow, Scotland. Each entry of the keys were collected by Glasgow. The purpose of the keys can only be speculated at, and their history is obscure, macabre, and often stained in blood. Like the Calgary keys, some numbers are skipped. These entries were written in 2011, over a decade ago. I have included every single one in this video. Now sit back and relax. 1. The Hotel. The hotel was only ever referred to as the hotel. The reason for this is supposedly that it was the most lavish, most important hotel in the entire city. However, it's more likely because a cliquish cabal obsessed with the building wanted to give it special airs and reverence. What is true is that each generation knew the hotel by a different name, as it was renamed and rebranded a handful of times throughout its life. The supposed reason for that is another story entirely, an unsettling tale of rumors and legend that drags together many of the eccentricities and anomalies of Glasgow's bloody history that people have long believed were just disparate, isolated incidents. That story is plagued by misinformation and misinterpretation, so for just now, we will focus on the hotel itself. The hotel lay in the heart of the city for over 150 years, and in its heyday, it was a very popular spot. But time took its toll on the establishment, and in its final years, many felt it had lost most of its glamour and sparkle. The rooms of the hotel were very reasonably priced considering its location, on one of the biggest and busiest streets in the city, literally only a few feet from the entrance to the Glasgow underground subway system. Its rooms were modestly decorated, its facilities Spartan, and its food serviceable, and as a result, the hotel came to enjoy a large clientele for short-stay visits. The hotel had one particularly special group of repeat clients over its history, the Guides, a handful of people who may be unkindly labeled a cult. The Guides were initially a Christian temperance group formed in the late 1800s, who met inside the hotel every few weeks for social gatherings and talks on the temperance movement. Most of the material that documents their existence comes from newspaper articles kept at the Mitchell Library and the University of Glasgow Library, though some unsavory suggestions about the Guides' practices is brought up in correspondences between the staff of the hotel and the city council offices. Just before the turn of the century, the group's structure radically changed. Many members stopped attending the gatherings, with more than a few disappearing altogether, and a rigid hierarchy began to emerge, with one woman, Anna Napier, as its de facto leader. The Guides had become far more than just a social group, but exactly what it had become was not documented, as the group no longer welcomed outsiders and did not advertise or report in the newspapers after 1892. The Guides did, however, keep records of some of their activities, written inside a single Gideon Bible that was kept inside a certain room of the hotel. The Guides made some arrangement with the hotel's proprietors in the last decade of the 1800s to the effect that only they were allowed to use that particular room, and it is only due to the descendants of those proprietors that we even know of the continued existence of the Guides and their altered Bible. Indeed, many former employees of the hotel mentioned that the room continued to see use up until recently, which suggests that the Guides exist in some form still. It has been suggested that this contemporary group is anything from a Wiccan coven to a new sect with religious tenets founded on the altered Bible itself. The room that the Guides supposedly use seems to change depending on who is asked. There is little consensus. The only information gleaned from the Bible comes from the reports of former employees of the hotel, who may have glanced at it while changing the room's linens. These reports include mentions of the drowning chapel, the Gorbal plague cart, the galvanic angel, the false saint, the river under the Bridge of Sighs, the Lady Love Well, the High Street Bone Railway, the panopticon experiments, and the milk of Mary. Many of these particular phrases are corroborated amongst several different people's accounts, though what each of them actually are tends to vary wildly, leading to the conclusion that urban legends and Chinese whispers have long since atrophied any usable accounts of the full contents of the Guides' altered Bible. Unfortunately, it is impossible to check the Bible for oneself. The hotel is gone now, ripped down and smashed to pieces as of June of this year, with new city center residential development and a shopping center being built atop it. Rumor mongers are quick to theorize that it is no coincidence that the hotel was demolished just as Glasgow's strange phenomena were gaining more widespread attention. The whereabouts of the Bible are unknown, even prior to the hotel's destruction. Members of staff at the hotel were unable to definitively locate either the room the Guides used, nor the Bible it supposedly housed. Having checked every Gideon Bible inside the hotel, I can confirm not one contained any of the Guides' records. 2. The Panopticon. Built in 1857, the Britannia Panopticon Music Hall is one of Glasgow's hidden treasures. It was largely forgotten about since its closure in 1938 until it was brought back into public awareness in the late 1990s. Some of the building is off limits and in poor condition due to its neglect over the decades, but campaigns have been undertaken to help restore and revitalize the building, with the occasional film show or market taking place under its high wooden eaves. The panopticon has a rich history, and one that is tangled in the swollen web of the living history of Glasgow's Gideon Keys. Over a century ago, the panopticon hosted the finest entertainment in Glasgow due to its proprietor, A. Pickard, continually pushing the bar and finding the best variety of attractions for miles around. The basement of the building held the Noah's Ark, the zoo, where, under cramped and often dubiously humane conditions, animals from all around the world could be gawked at by punters. Shows were performed on the main floor, and this was the place where Stan Laurel of Laurel and Hardy made his debut. There was a rooftop carnival, a waxworks museum, and even a freak show that displayed the bearded lady, Leonide, the lion-headed girl, and the human spider. According to some, E. Pickard wanted to go a step further. In order to keep up with the demand of entertainment in Glasgow, the first dedicated cinemas had begun to open in the early 1900s. Pickard apparently began to look further afield for more bizarre and unique exhibits. He found one in the form of Anna Napier and a small group of hitherto unknown individuals known as the Guides, who hosted what was known as the world's first psychic freak show. Not much is known about the show other than it was a mild success, with the medium, who was referred to only as the House of Matter, managed to emit forth with abandon some lengths of pallid ectoplasm, being a soft bundle of fragile white tissue, and that the ectoplasm formulated itself into all manner of bizarre and distressing personages, such as the Dormans, the fleshy choir, and awful, terrible figures referred to only as they, with which had a lengthy correspondence on various physic matters, of the nature of the city's occluded history, much of which was a spectacular fabrication. The entities Anna Napier released, however, did not leave. The only surviving eyewitness account of the world's first psychic freak show reported that the denouement was thrilling, as the host assembled made a show of causing the House of Matter and his attendants to be seemingly devoured by the ectoplasm, disappearing from the stage in a violent cacophony of abyssal sounds. Mrs. Napier thanked those in attendance, assuring them that the House of Matter was in good health but recovering from the difficult acrobatic procedure demanded of him to appear to vanish so, and guided the group outside. Nonetheless, a fearsome blemish marked the audience's mood once they had moved out of the building, with one hysteric woman shrieking absurdities such as seeing the flames of candles in the panopticon transforming into quivering piles of smoldering, ectoplasmic flesh, and a film of vibrating skin seeping down across the windows of the room. The woman was shushed by her companion and Anna Napier herself. Given that Anna Napier's show only lasted one night, and that certain members of the Guides seemed to go missing after this period, there may have been more truth to the woman's claim than the spectator realized. 5. The Mirror Trick. A handwritten letter with the lingering scent of perfume on it.
Hello again, sweetheart. How are you? I believe it's nighttime. You and Eiley got a little more practice by yourselves this time. Here's something that you can do without even leaving your home, and it's fairly safe. No inviting things in or exploring abandoned buildings like you seem to be intent on doing. It can be harrowing though, so make sure you have some liquor handy. For this you'll need a candle, a mirror, a dark room, and somewhere comfortable to sit. Position the seat about half a meter in front of the mirror, and then place the candle half a meter behind the seat so that when you turn off the lights and light the candle you should be able to see yourself in the mirror, but not the candle itself. Now just wait and just watch. The eyes are the windows to the soul, but sometimes they can be doors too. If you keep your stare and don't look away from the gaze of your mirror image, you'll see your own face begin to change. It's important you keep looking if you want to seek the truth. Your reflection's face will deform and become something else. Bits of skin will change shape and its eyes might disappear completely into blackness. Your own face with too many rows of teeth and a screaming mouth. Or maybe you'll see something that looks like your parents, but they aren't. They are something else entirely. The thing you have to realize is that whenever you look into a mirror, behind your reflection's eyes something else is looking back at you. You have to understand they are looking through at us all the time. My friend Dolly, who you met last fortnight at the meeting, says that we've evolved to see only our reflections because they would take notice of people who spent too much time looking and hunt them down. Po-Face thinks reflections are like windows or doorways into the city's dreams, and they are its nightmares. I don't know if I believe either of them, but the fact remains that they are there. They have always been there, and they will always be there. Sometimes I think they will find us all, and there will be no one left who remembers they exist. Trust me, honey, I don't want to scare you. I want you to be prepared for what must come. You can't save everyone, but you can save everything. By that I mean you can record all of your experiences, write them down, share them with people, and hope that even if something happens to you, you can still have something to help the next generation. That's all the chain is, honey, a chain of association. A link from one generation to the next. Someday you ought to make a new link in the chain by passing on what you know on. Remind me to take you along to meet our friend Ms. Chris Church next time you're at the meeting, okay? As always, if you can't stay safe, stay careful, honey. Lady K.
9. The ephod. The main body of an email, which had 2 photos attached. The photos have since been stitched into one single image.
I'm sorry to hear about Dominic Shaw. I understand you were very close. I know it's frustrating and difficult having to fabricate events just so that the police don't end up deciding that you're a suspect. You said you think the guides are involved somehow, and while I had told you everything I knew about them when we last met, one of my contacts recently clued me into something interesting in Glasgow's history. I offer it to you now as a gesture of goodwill and as a new lead to explore. When my mum passed away, my dad buried himself in his work, and it seemed to help him. I hope it helps you, too. There are 2 pictures attached which gives the full text of the story, but, to sum it up, in the early 1900s, a man known as an Onion Johnny people who made a living out of selling onions on a door-to-door basis delivered onions to a restaurant in the East End of Glasgow. One day, when the restaurant's cook cut into one of the onions, she found a ring inside, engraved with the word ZEBA. When the Onion Johnny returned the next week, she showed him it. He screamed, grabbed the ring, threw it down a drain and hurriedly left the city, weeping. The man was never seen again. This story is obscure and rather dull, until you look at it in the wider context of the city and its associated cabals. Zeba, which supposedly means manslayer, is the name of a Midianite king, the Midianites being a tribe of people from biblical times who worshipped false gods, such as Baal Berith and Asherah. Zeba was slain by a man sent by God on a holy mission to avenge his people and bring an end to the worship of idols. Now, I know who it is you think I mean, and I'm afraid it's not Moses. The answer is far more interesting. His name was Gideon. According to Judges 8:24, after completing his mission, Gideon took a number of relics and jewelry from the Israelites and their foes, melted them down, and had an ephod made out of them. The ephod, sometimes associated with a teraphim, was an object that, alongside the Urim and Thummim, was commonly used in some kind of divination practice that modern scholars still haven't managed to identify. I'm guessing they're rings, like the Zeba ring in the story. In an amusing twist, it turns out that the ephod Gideon created led his tribe back into idol worship after he died. God forever sends prophets to abolish idolatry, only to have them facilitate idolatry all over again. My purpose in telling you this is that if anyone knew where the Zeba ring is now, or the ephod, Urim and Thummim associated with it, it would be one of those unhinged key collectors that show up at relics on the solstice, equinox. Strike up a conversation with one of them and maybe you'll find it, or maybe they'll throw you in the White Room. It's dangerous, but danger surrounds the keys like an aura to keep people away from them, even people who don't know the danger for what it is, like Dominic Shaw. And please, for the love of the dear green place, stop framing the keys as mere stories. You've dug yourself into a hole by telling people the shadows at the Borstal and Duke Street were fictional, and now Dominic is dead. The police are investigating your unusual microfiction, and people think you forged Dominic's note. It took blood, sweat, tears, and a good bit more blood to find out what little we know of the keys, and a lot of people are angry that you're belittling the danger they've put themselves in by documenting them with half-truths. You need to start either writing fiction or reporting fact, not half of one and the other, or else the hole you've dug yourself into will be your grave. Consider that a threat if it will spur you to action sooner.
10. The face at the window. A short passage written on lined A4 paper in blue ballpoint pen. I didn't even realize it was so widespread in Glasgow. I thought I was the only one it had happened to. But if, like you say, other people have seen the same thing, I want them to know that they're not the only ones. I was sitting in my living room at about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. It wasn't dark, but there was something in the air. I kept getting that shiver you get all over your arms and back when there's something weird on your mind, you know. Like when you've started to scare yourself into thinking that a stranger's in your house, or that you're being watched. I thought it was just cabin fever from being in the house all day. I got up from the couch, turned towards the kitchen, and caught sight of something at the window. Eyes looking in. That's what I remember. A face up looking at me through my window. It looked like it was screaming, but there was no sound. I could actually feel my heartbeat all over me like I was hearing it. I felt my blood in every part of my body, and it hurt. It throbbed. A screaming face at the window, dead, white eyes focused on mine. Its mouth agape, as though seeing something awful in my eyes. I feel it screaming through my blood, burning up in my eyes and face. Then it was gone. I don't know how. I didn't see it move. I started to have a panic attack. I wondered if I'd blacked out and it got inside my house. In a way it was. I couldn't move about the house without thinking about it appearing somewhere else. My bedroom window at night, just as I go to close the curtains. In the shadows of the cupboard, staring through the hinge of the kitchen door, through the peephole of my front door. I freaked out, searched every bit of the house, but I never found it. It doesn't matter though, you only need to see it once, and it stays with you. I think I've seen it since. I can't tell anymore. As soon as I start to see something at the window, I see the white of the eyes, the dark hole of the screaming mouth. I can't stop seeing it, even when I close my eyes. It's everywhere without being anywhere. I keep thinking about the face. I don't even remember a body. I don't remember what it looks like. I keep thinking that I might see the face again in the street, the face of a passerby locking eyes with me and starting that silent scream. Sometimes when I dream about waking up and seeing it in my room. In the worst nightmares, it talks to me. It tells me it lives in my neighbors' houses. It watches me from their windows, and it starts to tell me things about them. It tells me things I couldn't ever know. Little secrets, little stories, little facts they wouldn't tell anyone. And then they always turn out to be right. What is that? What does that even mean? What if there are more, and all my neighbors have seen it? What if we all know each other's secrets, but we're too scared to say anything? Tell everyone who's seen it that I know what they're going through. I can't help. I can't even help myself, but I know. 12. The accordion song. Those who make regular visits to the city center will, at one time or another, come across the accordion women, middle-aged or elderly women wrapped up, regardless of the weather, in conservative clothing and busking with a large accordion either in Buchanan Street or Sauchiehall Street. Despite the fact that they are recognizable figures to most of the city's residents, very few people claim to know anything about them. Opinions vary from them being recent Polish immigrants to members of an age-old network of families whose traditions are finding their way into the streets of Glasgow. Only a handful of people know the truth. There is one piece of music that the accordion women play that is of particular note, not because of its musical worth but because of its unusual properties. The song is not very harmonious. Most who hear it being played simply attribute poor skill to the musician, but, like a particularly figurative poem or a complex painting, one must actually study the intricacies of the song for the melody to be appreciated. It only sounds discordant if you don't stop to listen. So, the next time you hear a particularly abrasive or lackluster song being played by the accordion women, stop. Listen. The song is intricate, dense, and cryptic. For all that it seems to be the same 20 seconds of a tune played over and over, there are harmonic variations within each canon that suggest subtle skill on the part of the musician. Each of the accordion's breaths wavers and frays in distinctive ways that calls to mind the breathlessness of a life or death chase, the sheer explosive agony of air bursting back and forth between quaking lungs. Every note is like the manic pulse of a rapidly beating heart on its way to a final, shuddering end. It is normal, once the song is over, to feel out of breath, agitated, and the feeling of something dim and distant tickling your engaged paranoia. Leave some money for the accordion women, and do not be miserly. They have performed a great service to you, and should be compensated for their sacrifice. If you can memorize the complex song with all its variations and flourishes, you are blessed. Whistling or humming the song is said to repel a number of bizarre shadows that stalk those who stare into the abyss of the world's darker corners. The accordion women play this song in the busiest parts of Glasgow in the hopes that at least some will find protection in its discordant notes. 14. The catalogue. There's an unusual catalogue being delivered throughout the city that's very easy to miss, but with the offers inside, it's well worth a look. The catalogue requires a subscription to be delivered, but without having actually seen a copy of the book, it's impossible to get the details required to make a subscription. The people who compile the catalogue list it only as G&J distribution. Apparently also the title of the catalogue have arranged its circulation such that only those in the know about the catalogue's odd contents can pass the details along to like-minded associates. However, the catalogue can sometimes be found on the doorsteps of acolytes and people involved in the occult, accidentally left on subway trains in the morning, in the magazine rack at a certain dentist's office in the East End, or, very occasionally, at one of the desks in the Mitchell Library. The details for subscription are found inside the front cover. They are not reproduced here as per a previous agreement with G&J Distribution. The catalogue is usually around 50 pages thick, printed in black and white on flimsy off-white paper, with the occasional grainy, low-quality photograph. Rather like a poorly made version of the telephone directory, most of its contents are described in a sparse, economic way that does not immediately make obvious the true nature of what is on offer. However, for those of discerning or unusual tastes and interest, the catalogue lists a smorgasbord of items and services in the city of Glasgow to peruse and purchase. The catalogue has a section for furniture and personal effects of the deceased, disguised, innocuously, as a previously owned section, where the lucky buyer may snatch themselves up a genuinely haunted mirror or cursed engagement ring. The marketplace occasionally lists dubious bargains such as vials of milk of Mary, bundles of hair clippings with names of acolytes attached, videotapes of unnamable rites, bottles of ritually prepared water, and the rarely seen Glasgow tarot. The personal section contains a number of acolytes at various stages of cognizance looking for companionship, collaboration, or keys, and, recently, listed an ad for people to assist in the reclamation of a certain book which resulted in the first and only robbery ever successfully committed at the hidden exhibition. The services page has a number of permanent advertisements by people and small businesses, like a listing for the Voice of Other Glasgow's radio station and a number of pirate television stations, as well as the occasional listing of various unusual services. For example, the guided tour of the Gideon Keys of Glasgow or the Search for Remains Foundation, which invariably are listed once before never appearing again. Alongside every service or product in the catalog is a set of numbers that you can call to arrange orders and get additional information. It is crucial that the acolyte only purchase or place something from the catalog if they are in great need. If you call to do business, they will ask for your home address, and irrespective of what address you may give them, G&J Distribution will always know exactly where you live. 22. The video file. The Department of Psychology at the University of Glasgow has an interesting MPEG video file on their server that was used up until 2009 as part of a presentation to second-year psychology students for 2 tutorials on cognitive bias and visual perception. The video was shot by a group of 4 fourth-year students at the university and was intended to chronicle a 5-day period in which they all lived on the streets of Glasgow without provisions, money, or modern conveniences, as part of a thesis on the Maslow hierarchy and how it corresponds to psychogenic needs. The video has been cropped and edited heavily, first by the students for their thesis, then by the module leaders for use in the cognitive bias tutorials. The video file opens with an introduction to Surinder, Stacy, Rashima, and Natalie, who give a brief outline of what they intend to study by sleeping on the Glasgow streets for a week. The next 10 minutes documents the group trying to find a place amongst the twilit central streets in which to set up their sleeping bags as the sky begins to darken. Spirits are high, but it's obvious that much of the cheer and messing around is done to keep the feeling of the January chill away. Surinder continually makes light of the camera attempting to use its facial focus technology to focus in on each of the group and failing. Once the group find an acceptable place, up a side street just off of Argyle Street, in between a tall apartment building and the entrance to a walled yard filled half with rampant weeds and half with trash, broken glass, and gravel. The group keep the tape running for 10 more minutes, with Surinder manning the camera, as they lie in their sleeping bags and discuss what they expect the next day will bring. The biting cold in the air easily felt in the quiver of their voices, before they bunker down and try to sleep. The tape's next 5 minutes shows the group discussing how they slept, and in Rashima's case, it was bad. She reports waking several times through the night and thinking that she saw figures standing out amongst the shadows of the tall weeds in the gravel yard adjacent to the group's camp. The footage cuts to the evening, where 3 of the group are bunched together, talking about an encounter with the police that must have happened off camera, before Rashima's voice cuts through the air as she waves maniacally at the group from inside the yard. The camera cuts to the group's feet as they stand around an open, uncovered drain hole in the ground, around 3 feet wide, with a rudimentary set of iron bars pushed into the wall to act as a functional ladder. Rashima insists she saw a figure standing in the same location the night before. The group seemed to entertain her story rather than dismiss it instantly, and, as the camera continually flickers its focus while facing the impenetrable darkness only a few feet down from the mouth of the open drain, the team agrees that everyone will sleep in shifts in case there is someone nearby that may pose danger to the group. The camera pans back to the area of the yard where the open drain sits as the group head back to their camp, for all that those few seconds are shot with no focusing problem. There is still something stark and eerie about the scene, almost as though there was something there that, when the viewer sees it, would immediately unlock it. Once again, the camera cuts to late night. It is difficult to see well due to the inadequate lighting from nearby streets and from the camera's continual auto-focusing. Stacy is sound asleep, Rashima is sitting up in her sleeping bag, and Natalie is standing up next to the 6-foot-high metal fence around the yard, apparently shouting over towards a dark corner at the far side of the yard. "Isn't that where the drain is?" Surinder asks from behind the camera. No one answers, but Rashima turns to face Surinder with an expression of equal parts contempt and fear. The camera alternately focuses on Natalie and the corner of the yard where Natalie has focused her attention. The footage jumps to the next morning, with Surinder and Natalie looking at the hole again. Surinder takes a bottle lying nearby and drops it into the hole to gauge its depth, but no sound answers his query. Stacy soon joins the group, insisting that the footage is detracting from what they were there to investigate, and that they are being unprofessional and unscientific and passively encouraging Rashima to be frightened. The final 20 minutes of the footage takes place at night. The entire group is awake and talking animatedly. The camera pulls up as Surinder stands and takes it to the edge of the yard, then jams his arm through a hole in the fence to get the camera as far in as possible. For 3 seconds, there is silence that accompanies the shot of an indistinct, but vaguely humanoid figure in the shadows of the yard. A muffled sound, like the crunch of gravel muffled by a cloth-shod foot, chokes the silence, and the whole scene erupts. Rashima screams, Natalie shouts something to an unknown person, Stacy begins to moan as if in pain, and Surinder yelps and drops the camera. The last few seconds are footage of the camera spinning, hitting the ground, and staring out into darkness. The frames immediately following the camera's crash to the graveled ground have been slowed down either due to the damage or to post-processing. The facial focus flickers once towards the interminable blackness before it, and the sharp contours of a vaguely human face emerge from the shadows of the darkened yard. The camera catches only the pinprick eyes and ragged grin of the face before it falls out of focus and turns off completely. 24. The new build. There is a building in the city center that has been under construction for at least the past 4 decades. It's not hidden, it's not disguised, it's just taken for granted. However, no workers are ever seen on the site, aside from those who visit the building once a fortnight to check for signs of vandalism. When someone looks at the new build and realizes that work on it has never moved on, a set of interesting properties of the new build make themselves known. One such property is the absence of an interior. Trying to enter the half-constructed rooms or climbing down into the structure reveals that, though it should be possible to get inside the half a dozen solid, sheltered rooms, the acolyte will always be standing outside, no matter how they try to get in. Bizarrely, thrown objects are immune to this rule. One could easily toss sensitive documents, old personal effects, or things that might be used as evidence in undesired police investigations into the unapproachable rooms and be assured that it would not be discovered more or less. It is simply impossible for living creatures to enter the rooms. They either find the passage impossible or find themselves in a different building entirely. This is down to the new build's second interesting property. By looking through the scaffolding of the building at different angles, different buildings are quite clearly visible. This is not down to the building being a mashup of various architectural styles, although several are employed to disguise this bizarre quirk. In fact, the geometry of the scaffolds actually allow for passage from the new build to specific other sets of scaffolding and construction sites around the city. There is no guarantee of safety, however. Running along the wooden planks on the second story of the new build may cause you to shift to the 7th story of an unfinished building in Queen's Park, but this may prove vital if you need to make a hasty retreat from the city center. These spatial shortcuts do not always remain constant, and can switch even as someone is passing through them, leading to our third interesting property, the inhabitants of the new build. The inhabitants are those people unfortunate enough to have been crossing between the new build and another place when the shortcut they were on suddenly changed. Because of the unusual geometric effects of such a change, most inhabitants simply resemble fleshy canvases spread across frames of metal scaffolds, human forms punctured by bursts of broken brick and wood, heads bisecting corrugated iron with steel wire nerves. The inhabitants reside in the unapproachable center of the new build, making themselves the custodians of all the unwanted objects that are tossed inside. They know our deepest, darkest secrets, all the things we want to hide, and they collect them when they fall into the new build, stashing them away in some unseen room. Those that have secrets so dark they must be hidden here must pray the inhabitants are never released from the unapproachable room. 36. The Earthen Womb. On December 8, 2011, Scotland was hit by strong winds that, thanks to the zeal of Scotland's population, was unofficially termed Hurricane Bobag. Transport around the country halted, businesses closed for the day, buildings were torn up, and electrical power was disrupted. The storm also uncovered a room buried several feet under the surface of a garden in Annisland, which the garden's owner never realized was ever there. Despite having no entrances whatsoever, the room bore signs of recent habitation. The room was an almost perfect hemispherical shape, dug into the soil by unknown hands. The floor was somewhat smoothed, and in several places, shapes reminiscent of footprints can be seen, as well as patches of earth darkened by the spilled blood of a house cat, whose remains were found near the middle of the room, freshly killed. On first glance, the room appears to have hundreds of tender roots reaching in through the dirt wall. On closer inspection, these roots are seen to be small, fleshy tendrils. The tendrils themselves seem stiff but flexible, and could be manipulated like a human finger. One particular set of tendrils, however, lay slack and lifeless against the wall of the room. When they were tugged at, a clod of earth collapsed out of the wall, revealing a desiccated crumple of withered flesh. Comparisons were instantly drawn with a human placenta. The owner of the property, before moving out and putting the house on the market, mentioned that her garden always seemed to have more birds in it than the neighbors, and once saw a bird instantly disappear before her eyes in the garden, but rationalized and dismissed it. She also actively prevented her son from playing in the garden, as he had told his mother on several occasions that someone in the garden had grabbed him while he was playing. His mother came to believe there was a Savile in the neighborhood. The hidden room was filled in with soil after its owner decided to move house. In the 2 weeks that followed the aftermath of the storm, many homeowners in the area reported that the grass and soil in the gardens had been partially dug up. 38. The coins. Found on a now-defunct forum.
Look what I found on the MSE site. Looks like these people are talking about touch pieces, a practice that has long since died out. Only, these touch pieces look like they were crafted for James Stewart. Maybe the reason the tradition stopped is because every monarch after James didn't have a legitimate claim to the throne. James Stewart must have surviving descendants through the paternal line living in Scotland in order to activate the coins. Look for doctors, nurses, and faith healers. If you get no results, try something more conceptual, like psychiatrists, tree surgeons, care workers, addiction counselors, or hospice workers. The coins need a monarch to function, and there's a true king living somewhere in Glasgow.
My mum's from the east end of Glasgow too, and she said that her mum had a catch-all cure for an upset stomach. Just pour a glass of Coke, then drop a penny into it. The penny turns it flat, and it'll help to settle your stomach acid. My mum had a special penny given to her by my grandmother that she used for the cure, a wee copper one that was slightly bigger than a 1 pence coin, and had 3 and 8 on one side, and the face of some king or prince on the other. I've tried it with normal pennies, but it doesn't seem to work half as well as that special coin my mum had. I asked her if she still had it, but she must have lost it before she moved to Govan. Oh, my parents had a coin just like that as well. It had the same markings on it, and I remember my dad told him the face was an old Scottish king. Anyway, if you need more tips, try adding baking soda to a glass of water, or making a cup of tea with honey or chamomile. Good luck.
40. The radio station. There is a special radio station transmitting in the Glasgow region that delivers unusual weather reports. It is relatively unknown due to its limited coverage area and the fact that either people unknowingly cite the wrong frequencies to tune into the station, or else the frequencies change over time. Most suggest the station transmits at 99.3 MHz, but some have claimed to have success picking up the station at 106.3 and 90.1 on certain broadcasts. The radio station is manned by Gordon Hamilton, also known as Gordo or the voice of other Glasgows. He's an amiable, well-spoken, and intelligent host, someone who you would appreciate having a pint down the local with. He transmits at 2 a.m. almost every morning. If he misses a broadcast, a horrific and unsettling excuse is usually given the following morning. His show tends to last between 1 and 2 hours, depending on how much material he has to cover. The show consists of a weather report and news in and around Glasgow, and sometimes, during times of great strife or unusual events in the city, Gordo allows listeners to call in on air, providing a presumably temporary or disposable phone number to call. The weather report includes facts on mundane weather patterns, temperatures, and the like throughout Glasgow for the following few days. However, his report also includes a number of phenomena not typically reported in weather updates. He gives information on where and when the next roar will be heard, on brick cover warnings for the days when the shadows of the city grow more dark and abyssal, locations of potential splinters occurring throughout the city where hauntings may be manifest, prominent dates or hours for cyclical monthly or yearly phenomena, the overall thanatotic stress of the surrounding regions, estimated from how many have died in the city over the past few days, and, on certain abysmal, rainy days, delivered between sobs, prayers, and pleas for people to find a safe place to hide. He reports that they have made appearances within the city limits. The latter reports tend to last only a few minutes before the broadcast disappears in a burst of static and the station goes off air for a number of days. His news reports tend also to include matters that only a small number of Glasgow's residents would be interested in or made aware of. For example, his most recent broadcasts covered the robbery at the Hidden exhibition, warnings sent out to people named in police radio broadcasts as being persons of interest in suspicious cases, the reappearance of the brass candle, and the evisceration of John Paul McGuigan, which went entirely unreported by the Strathclyde police. For all that Gordo's broadcasts are almost daily, nobody seems to have identified exactly where the voice of other Glasgows is transmitted from. Hearsay claims that it is located in Govan, but there is little to no reason as to why this is, other than the signal for the station being clearer south of the River Clyde, nor has anyone come forward to claim that they've met Gordo. Some have suggested, in accordance with the station's name and Gordo's nickname, that Gordo doesn't live in Glasgow at all, not in this version of Glasgow, anyway. 41. The Roar, a transcript from a radio broadcast.
All right then, we've got another caller on the line. This is Michael Harris from Scottstown. How are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing fine. Gordo, how's yourself?
Good. Quiet night, no rain.
That's good to hear.
So we've had people calling in to give us their stories about the roar last Saturday night. What have you got for us then, Michael?
Well, right. I was down in Govan that night round at my mate's house after the Old Firm match. Now, at the front of the house there's a court that all the flats around about their use, and a bunch of us were out letting off fireworks.
You're a Hoops fan then, Mike?
I am, yeah. So, we were letting off a ton of fireworks out in the communal court for a good 10 minutes. And after they all went up, our ears were absolutely ringing. But then, just as it had gotten quiet, there was this massive sound all around us, like something huge just screaming in a metal voice. I'll tell you what, Gordo, I used to work in the shipbuilding industry, and one of the ships I was working on once had a leak, and the whole thing went up.
It exploded.
It did, with me inside it even. I didn't even really hear the explosion so much as feel it, because it rocked the whole ship and threw me on my feet, but the sound of the metal support straining under the weight, groaning and grinding as whole chunks of the ship twisted and collapsed inwards like hungry metal mouths trying to chew up everyone on board. I remember hearing that gnashing metal, and that was exactly the noise of the sound we heard last Saturday, like something huge and metallic grinding and twisting up in the sky.
Christ, that sounds horrible. How did you and your mates react?
Some of us had bleeding ears after hearing it, and my wife was having a fit, shouting and screaming about rusted lungs. We calmed down after a bit, and most of us agreed that we probably had busted eardrums from the match and the fireworks, so that settled us a little at the time. Except the next day, one of my mates who'd left early and wasn't at the football match said he had heard something too. But some of the neighbors heard the fireworks but didn't hear the sound in the sky at all.
That happens more often than you'd think, Mike. It's like you can't hear it when you're indoors.
What is it, Gordo?
That's just the thing, Mike. Nobody knows. Every so often we get a phone call here at the station warning us about it. Then you hear a roar somewhere up in the clouds. The wind speeds crank up. All radios in a mile radius blare what can only be described as screams and static. A handful of people go missing, and nobody can tell us what the fuck is going on.
Jesus Christ.
Thanks for your time, Mike. Stay safe out there.
43. The Missing Girl. There is an ongoing rescue mission to find a girl that nobody remembers, with sparse information as to what she looks like, where she comes from, and who she is. Legend has it that the first persistent record of the missing girl was found inside a Bible that had been annotated with various miscellaneous references to the city of Glasgow. A Bible said to be held by the guides, a shadowy cabal tied into the living myth of Glasgow's Gideon keys. In that Bible, she was named Saint Ella. She would appear during the colder months in the Blackadder aisle of the Glasgow Cathedral, praying to Saint Mungo to stop monsters from taking her back at midnight. When the cathedral closed for the night, she would be forced to leave, and by 12 o'clock, all trace of her disappeared from the city. But people do not just disappear. Similarly, people do not just appear. Saint Ella had to have been someone before appearing in folklore. Saint Ella has a number of relics that hint at her existence, spread throughout the city, but only on certain days of the year, which are apparently impossible to tell. On these days, in a certain dental practice in the East End, her name reappears on the patient database. Her bus pass occasionally remanifests in the hands of the last person to hold it for just under 24 hours. A calendar from 2002 gains a blue circle around January 24th. But these relics lose their ties with Saint Ella as soon as their allotted 24 hours are up. Information on her is impermanent. This is perhaps due to the strangest miracle associated with Saint Ella, the fact that, unless the acolyte is aware that she only manifests on certain days, they will forget ever hearing about her or ever knowing her. Which means, for knowledge of Saint Ella's predicament to have manifested in the first place, someone, somewhere in Glasgow, knows what happened to this little girl in the first place, and yet they remain silent. 45. The waterlogged coffin or the unmarked grave. There is a strange tradition that was passed on in the pubs on Paisley Road West, specifically in the Cardonald area. This tradition was only ever discussed in those wee hours of the morning, when the shadows outside the hazy, rain-lashed windows seemed too dense and too dark to ever allow safe travel back home. When half-lidded, drunken conversation began to drift towards the strange and the supernatural. Supposedly, the tradition began in Buchanan's Bar earlier in the century, then passed on to Howden's Bar, then Parkway. It seems as though the tradition has died out, but the acolyte may be able to resurrect it. On the first rainy night after the new moon, in any of the aforementioned bars when the bar staff call for last orders, the acolyte could order a waterlogged coffin. Although in Howden's Bar, it was referred to as an unmarked grave. The bartender would then serve the acolyte a cocktail, a dirty brown mixture with a number of white lumps floating in it, and underneath the glass would be a scrap of paper. The acolyte would drink the cocktail and leave, headed for the Creighton Cemetery just across the street. The scrap of paper would indicate a grave, and this grave would have a particular significance on that night. Unfortunately, the bars on Paisley Road West have since closed down or discontinued serving waterlogged coffin. So nowadays the acolyte must perform their own due diligence. On rainy nights, one grave in the cemetery will be marked with a small glass bottle, sitting atop the headstone and collecting rainwater. The grave will always be dedicated to a soldier who was killed in the First World War, but their headstone will be completely blank, and it is not necessarily a different grave every rainy night, though it is unheard of for the same grave to be indicated within the same 333 days. The bottle of rainwater will be important later. Do not empty it out. Dig up the grave where the bottle is situated, and do your absolute utmost to ignore the objects that may appear in the grave as you dig. Your paranoia is likely to increase as you dig, from hearing phantom voices in amongst the torrent of rain and the froth of splashing water to the odd vibrations deep under your feet. So even when you unearth a lost childhood toy with broken bones sticking out of it, even when you dig up a familiar photograph of your younger self seemingly suffering from harlequin ichthyosis, you must cast these aside. Only when your shovel hits the wood of the coffin 6 feet down can you focus your attention. Smash open the coffin's lid. It is easier than trying to move enough dirt to open it, and stick your arm into the hole. Your fingers will clasp around a cold, hard object, which, when you pull it out, will reveal itself to be a small rusted metal box that rattles as you move it. Inside the box is a selection of teeth, of various sizes and stages of decay, containing exactly 8 incisors, 8 premolars, 4 canines, and 12 molars. If you wash these teeth using the water from inside the bottle atop the grave, the teeth can be used as a method of divination to gain answers to any question when they are thrown on the ground of the city of Glasgow. It is pivotal, however, to replace a tooth as soon as it breaks, otherwise, the teeth will no longer read the future, they will only read you. 47. The Coercion School. In Gavan, there were 3 schools all situated very close to one another: St. Saviour's Primary School in Dunsmuir Street, Cartvale School in Vicarfield Street, and Copeland Primary in Burndyke Court. Each of these schools served the children of various ages throughout Gavan, up until they were demolished in the case of St. Saviour's and Cartvale, or converted in the case of Copeland Primary, and replaced with the Gavan Road campus, a huge building that houses several schools worth of children. Interestingly, there was a 4th school that was demolished around the same time as the other 3, the former St. Gerard's RC School, which had closed in 1998 and was situated adjacent to Cartvale School, and behind what is now the Gavan Road campus. During the demolition of St. Gerard's, however, the construction company discovered a tunnel that ran underneath the foundations of the school, almost completely caved in with mud and stone due to the demolition work above. The construction company filled it in and built over it, writing it off as an old maintenance tunnel, which is true, but it didn't explain the bloodstains splattered across the dirty, broken floor. The teenagers in Gavan knew the tunnel as what it was: the entrance to the Coercion School. It was accessible from a handful of tunnels throughout the streets of Gavan, but the principal entrance was located in Cartvale School. The boiler room of the school held a hatch in the floor which, when hoisted up with a nearby metal bar, granted access to the maintenance tunnel. According to the teenagers that used the Coercion School, the tunnel was decaying and decrepit even before the demolition of St. Gerard's blocked it up. The only illumination came from decades-old lamps on the dusty walls, and even then most of them shed only dim yellow light that flicker, like the blink of eyes staring and assessing the visitors as they walked from bright spot to bright spot in an otherwise pitch-black corridor. Blood splatters from past visitors stained the dirty floor, marking a red path to the end of the tunnel. To the main hall of the school, their tutor would already be waiting. The tutor's physical appearance can only be guessed at. He apparently confined himself to teaching the teenagers from behind a large pane of steel grid-reinforced broken glass, riddled with cracks, splinters, and twisted wire that spanned the entirety of one of the walls of the room. The tutor was visible only as a faint silhouette on the glass, backlit by pallid illumination. The only characteristic that witnesses could describe him by was his voice, a scraping, ragged trill. His words never sounded like they were spoken. They felt as though they were whistling through the cracks of a broken pipe. The tutor's lessons were exercises in barbarism, a school of magic the teenagers called coercomancy or coerciomancy, magic through dominance, bullying, and oppression. Students would take turns humiliating one another in ways redolent of military detainment camps, ripping apart one another's egos so that they can scar over and harden, or else so that the weak would be permanently imprinted with their abuser's immovable authority. They would practice physical violence upon one another, finding the most efficient ways to cause pain without leaving lasting marks, performing the simplest fractures that could be explained away with ease. They would experiment with threats and intimidation tactics, develop new ways of psychological torture, and engineer new states of fear and subjugation in each other until only the strongest would remain. And then, when the tutor told them they had done enough, speaking in his dry, ragged voice that sounded like gasps of air being ripped apart by the broken glass separating him from his students, they would leave, and he would step away from the glass pane. The main access tunnel to the school has been closed off, but it is rumored that access is still possible through other tunnels spread throughout Gavan. Meanwhile, the school's students are putting their teachings into practice: the boss who continually beats you down, the doctor who humiliates you every time you visit the surgery, the friend who is blatantly trying to steal your partner. Students, every one of them. Rumor has it, though, that these students are looking to become tutors themselves, and, at the cost of your ego, your pride, and your integrity, you too can become a student of the School of Coercion Magic. 49. The Watchtower. Go to any subway station south of the River Clyde and ask for a single to Merkland Street. You'll likely be told that Merkland Street has now become Partick, but reply, "I like to keep one foot in the past, one in the future." They should make some motion to show they've understood you. If not, or they ask you to repeat yourself, walk out of the station and rip the ticket up, it's of no use to you. If you manage to get the ticket, get on the outer circle line and board the next train that arrives. Figure how many stops you have to wait before getting to Partick. For example, it's 1 from Govan, 7 from Bridge Street, and the second you sit down, close your eyes. Keep them tightly shut and count down the stops, and when you get to Partick, stand up and walk through the doors with your eyes shut. Open them once your feet touch the platform. You'll find yourself at the topmost point of the watchtower, a colossal, concrete monolith that rises up from a valley with a view that spans miles. The wilderness around the watchtower seems to indicate the city's current health. In almost all cases, the valley is as empty as it is dry and barren, but now and again, new things appear. A black, charred horse and cart that rides through the blasted valley, leaving a trail of dark soot and rot behind it. A sickening yellow shape that resembles an enormous cloud in the sky, until it gets closer and you realize it's a creature of impossible dimension, roaring through the deserted plains. A confluence of misshapen figures, congregating around the base of the watchtower, looking up at you with their blurred, thrashing faces as the rain of annunciation falls from the heavens. It is important to take note of as much of the wilderness around the watchtower as you can. As quickly as you can, you will wake up inside the train you thought you had left as soon as it reaches Partick again. 50. The Rippling Eyes. If you are walking through the western part of the city center on a day where it is raining, you may catch sight of a figure standing in the center of a small alley, locked in between 2 tenement blocks. It's hard to see him in the rain, but the distinguishing traits are easy to make out. Black suit, white shirt, no umbrella. There is something wrong with his head. The murky, light brown flesh seems to ripple and quake with the rain, like the dark surface of a pool disturbed by splashes of water, throwing bizarre shapes and strange waves across his features that endlessly reflect his surroundings. Stand at the threshold between the road you are on and the lane, and listen. The man will speak slowly, in a series of distorted voices that fade in and out of one another, like several children shouting underwater. The man speaks one verse of an unknowable poem that trembles and quivers in your ears, like the crashing waves of a radio signal being transmitted through water. When he finishes, he performs a small gesture, clasping his hands together like in prayer, before he trickles away, disappearing from sight as rain lashes across in your eyes. From that moment on, whenever you stare into the surface of any body of water, you will see the reflection of another Glasgow, with perpetually twilit streets swept by rain from bruised purple thunderclouds, tenements dominating the murderous skyline with windows filled with flickering candlelight. This city is our cosmic mirror image, and, as a reflection of us, our life, and our city, the image of the other Glasgow can act as a barometer for the supernatural activity in Glasgow. But when they fill the rain-swept streets, staring out through the darkening water surface with their pallid, empty eyes, wearing the faces of your mother and father, you must find shelter. You will find that the water surfaces can be more than just windows. They can be doors to those who seek to come through and take your transcendent eyes. 54. The Music Store. The HMV store on Buchanan Street is a great place to shop. It's wide and spacious, chock full of the latest CD and DVD released, and even has a dedicated lounge at the top of the stairs for LAN gaming. The only thing is, the store is far more spacious than people realize. There's a number of rooms that still exist inside the store, despite having been demolished. They're difficult to detect unless you know what you're looking for, patches of sunlight and shadow that aren't being cast by any of the windows in the store. You see, even though these rooms don't exist anymore, they still cast light in a similar way as they did before. Windows in these phantom rooms will be dimly visible just a few inches away from the glass panes of the store. Areas that should be brightly lit will instead be cloaked in shadow from a non-existent wall, and candlelight without any source reflects off of the television screens on the upper floor. The effect is more detectable during the night, but of course, very few people are in or around the store during the night. Most disconcerting is when light in the real world seems to flicker as the room's occupants move around, temporarily casting shadows in the store. 61. The Lab. There is a building in Paso Park that often goes unnoticed by everyone who passes it by. It's tucked away at the end of a street of industrial buildings that continually pump clouds of chemical gases into the air, which is fortunate for the people that work in the hidden away building, as it helps mask the odor of the things that they are producing through clandestine chemistry. If you have a particular need for substances that are harder or more innovative than the heroin that is rife throughout Glasgow, you need to visit the building at the end of the row on a Sunday, either between 4 and 5 in the morning, or 11 and 12 at night. If you knock on the door and hand over a full bottle or packet of any prescription medicine when requested, you'll be led into the lab. The lab is operated by 3 people. A woman named Rachel Marshall handles all the business inquiries, and it is she that allows you into the lab when you arrive. She's playful but assertive in asking for your details, straight-talking but eloquent in describing her business, and powerful but relaxed in her neatly pressed blouse and skirt. If it's your first time there, she'll give you a brief tour around the large, single room that she and her team work in. The low stone ceiling makes the place seem quite cramped, but the use of partitions to cordon off certain areas does do wonders to give each section of the room its own unique personality. Rachel provides introductions to the other two members of her team, Mark Lawson, a man in his 40s with an unusual taste in anabolics, and Harpreet Singh, a 22-year-old religious studies student. They do most of the cooking and manufacturing in their own corners of the lab. Mark, a bald man with bulky, unnatural muscles interwoven with ridges of veins, spends most of his time at a desk cluttered with racks of hypodermic needles. If you are present during the morning, you may find him gripping one of the filled needles in between quivering fingers, pressing it in only a few inches of flesh above his nipple, and plunging a thin, milky liquid into his chest. Occasionally, lashes of blood squirt across the floor of the dingy building, a failure to aspirate with the needle, but otherwise, his experiments seem to progress quietly. At night, he is seen taking empty needles and drawing another, darker liquid from his pectorals. If asked, he will explain that during his wife's pregnancy and his child's birth, he experienced some of the biological and emotional processes that his wife was undergoing, a medical anomaly known as Kuvaid syndrome, and he is attempting to metabolize a formula in his own body that replicates the hormonal glow he experienced, using a strange milk taken from an undying, unseeding plant locked away in a museum somewhere in the city. Harpreet, a young woman in a lab coat, with her hair tied back in a net, works at a number of small tables with neatly organized equipment and paraphernalia lined up along the sides. She is most often seen experimenting with an off-white powder, sometimes using the flame from a brass candle-shaped object to heat it up inside a foil cradle. Apparently, she is synthesizing a new form of heroin that allows the user to see hidden pathways, roads that never existed, and imaginary anti-spaces in the mesh of city streets. After the tour and introductions, Rachel will take you to her office near the front of the lab and ask what it is you're looking for. It is best to turn down the offers of methamphetamine, a drug that accelerates and intensifies the effects of almost all other chemicals, or code, an oxycodone variant that allows the user to see the messages written on the walls of the ancient city. No, the piece de resistance of Rachel Marshall's lab is Gideon's key, brittle brown crystals packaged inside pages from a Bible, which, when ingested, will cause the user to experience a heavily altered state of consciousness that they will summarily never remember. But when they awake, they will find themselves in the approximate location of the most recent thing they wanted to find, provided it is still within the region of Glasgow. Rachel will never tell you the price of the drug, nor will she demand anything from you as she hands over the neatly folded square of Bible pages. In fact, she seems to suggest that the price is always paid during the amnesiac trip after taking Gideon's key. What it is anyone's guess. But given that the lab always seems to get a lot more equipment, stock and resources immediately after someone takes away Gideon's key, it would seem that it's what keeps Rachel Marshall in business. 63. The Water Tower. It is often suggested that the elemental attribution of the city of Glasgow is water. Geomantic practices that operate on the scale of the central belt of the country declare that, with its birth on the Moland in Arburn and subsequent growth over the River Clyde, Glasgow, in the west, represents water. Airy Edinburgh, with its elevation and lofty castle atop the mountain, lies in the east. Fiery Carluke with its coal mines lies in the south. Scottish geomancers bicker over whether north is represented by Stirling, the gateway to the Highlands, Aberdeen, the granite city, or Falkirk, the speckled church. Much of Glasgow's mysteries seem to grow out of the water. Glasgow itself has yet more esoteric associations which further develop its strange connection to water. Its 9 major water towers are often said to be symbolic of the planets, and the tower at Cranhill represents watery Neptune, which in astrological terms governs the mind, mystery, dreams, illusion, deception, the occult, isolation, and visionary experiences. In a sense, it is the planet most strongly associated with acolytes. The Cranhill Water Tower looks bizarre when it is lit up at night by the eerie colors from the lamps placed around it. The cuboidal tank with cylindrical legs suggests a colossal, cosmic fountain temple, spilling over with sacred water. For many, gazing upon its otherworldly appearance sometimes dregs up memories of something seen within their dreams, and they will readily attest to the feeling of some deep secret locked away inside. To unlock this mystery, the acolyte must go to the tower at night, an act itself fraught with danger, since many unsavory types are attracted to the eerie allure of the tower and fall asleep underneath it, at the feet of one of the harpy-like wireframe sculptures that stand as guardians around it. The tower acts as a kind of sleep temple common to Egyptian or Greek cultures, allowing the acolyte to gain insight in their dreams, and certainly, once asleep, the acolyte will dream. It is important to keep in mind that, should the dream become lucid at any point, the acolyte must tell their subconscious to allow them to talk to the man in the tower. The acolyte will cut through their dream and find themselves in a tight, constricted room of complete and total darkness. Walking a few paces in any direction reveals metal walls, but no exits. The only other sensations are the sound of great, heaving breaths from an unknown source, and the trickle of water. A voice will penetrate the darkness, in between the heavy inhalations. Somewhere in the room, beyond sight and touch, is a person who introduces themselves as the man in the tower. He will first ask if they are there, to which you must answer no. Declare yourself as an acolyte that seeks the truth, and he will answer any questions you may have about the watery mysteries in the city, including the necropolis lake, the Lady Love Well, and the Rain of Annunciation. However, you only have 5 minutes to ask your questions and have them answered. The room is slowly filling up with water, and the acolyte must wake themselves from their dream before it completely fills. Those acolytes with little or no lucid dreaming experience go missing. The final impact of their lives nothing more than another tangy taste in the drinking water of the city. 72. The brass candle. There is an object that seems to find its way into the collection of various shops around the west end of Glasgow. The rhyme and reason as to where it appears is unknown. This object is a brass ornament shaped like a candle that, when lit by the flame from a matchstick, casts a light that allows the holder to see ghostly streets that never appeared on any of the city's maps, dilapidated corridors and rooms of dead buildings long since vanished, and primeval tunnels that lead deep under the city. The holder of the brass candle can travel down these ancient places for as long as the candle remains lit. If the candle is ever left in the dark, unlit, it disappears, and, at the next equinox or solstice, will reappear in a shop somewhere in the West End. Curiously, a number of people who buy the candle tend to go missing within a few weeks. Perhaps they've been negligent in keeping the brass candle lit while walking those ancient pathways. 77. The Manhunt House. The older children in Maryhill play a strange game in what is known to them as Manhunt House. Typically, the game is reserved for those between 13 and 17. The children do not often allow adults to play. They may demand the adult buy them cigarettes or alcohol from the nearby newsagents, but following through with their demands does not automatically mean that they will allow you to accompany them. They are fickle and capricious. Nonetheless, the lucky acolyte may be allowed to join in, on very rare occasions. The game is kept sacred by the children, and when the game is threatened, the children's team spirit keeps it safe, no matter what the cost. In 2004, several children went missing, and when word got out that the children were playing a strange game with certain adults in an abandoned house, a coalition of the parents, media, and police tried to smoke out the individuals responsible. To protect their game, the children chose to martyr a number of their parents, those most vocal in defiance of the game, corroborating false claims of child abuse and perverse photographs in order to have them locked away. It's impossible to say if the furore died down because the rest of the parents believed they had got the culprits, or if they were cowed into submission and silence after seeing that those who spoke out against the strange game, whatever it was, ended up getting life imprisonment. The secret game continues in the uneasy, half-knowing silence. The game takes place at 8 p.m. in a particularly run-down, dilapidated 2-up 2-down flat connected to a row of 4 other flats just like it, the eponymous Manhunt House. The front garden is sparse and bare, occupied only by muddy stumps of ragged bushes, broken pottery, and chunks of stone from the decrepit stone path, half sunk in the choking earth. The door to the property is always locked, save for select nights of the year, usually in midsummer and midwinter, when a small, silver Yale key with an old-fashioned military patch keyring is found in the front door. This allows a new game inside Manhunt House to begin. The game starts the second that all of the players enter the house, and the key is used to lock the door from the inside. The brass clock sitting on the mantel beside the front door chimes at 8 o'clock, then remains silent until midnight, which is when the game ends. Once the clock chimes the 8th hour, every player runs away to various parts of the house, looking for hiding places. The aim of the game of Manhunt is simple: the hunted hide, and the hunters hunt. However, this is a special version of Manhunt, and the house gives one more objective, as inside the house, there are special photographs hidden away throughout the house, pictures of bizarre objects, locations, and events throughout the city of Glasgow, an album spread through the house of every Gideon key in the city. One particular photograph that seems to crop up often when acolytes play is an overexposed, blurry image of several children, bunched together in an indistinct room, with eerily smeared looks of abject terror on their blanched white faces, each of which is instantly recognizable as one of the children in the house alongside the acolyte. The children collect the photos like trading cards, often completely unaware as to what the photographs really represent. The hunted are allowed to take any photographs they find. The hunters can only take photographs from the hunted that they find. Acolytes, either hunters or hunted, are encouraged to do their utmost to collect as many photographs of their own as possible. The house conspires to keep photographs collected by the children out of the hands of acolytes using many of its idiosyncratic eccentricities. One particular eccentricity of the house tends to go undetected by newcomers until around 5 minutes into the game, when the player has stumbled across the 4th kitchen, or realized that, having taken 3 left turns down the main hallway, they should be back where they started, and not in the attic space above the bathroom. The house is impossibly large, but never in an obvious way. There are no sweeping ballrooms or colossal staircases, no vaulted ceilings or elaborate lounges. Every space in the house is low, narrow, and cramped. The upper and lower corridors never seem excessively long. They just have far too many branching corridors, far too many doors, far too many sets of stairs. And yet, despite its cyclopean size, no two areas in the house are the same. As far as one can tell, there are no two matching sets of wallpaper anywhere in the house. Each floor is separated from the others by a differing amount of steps, and the architecture is of varying size and design. The only commonality are the brass clocks, identical to the one near the front door, in every single room, which all count down the hours till midnight. Many explain this away by claiming that the other flats in the street have had the walls separating them knocked down, resulting in one long collection of 5 different apartment blocks. This goes some way to explaining the eccentricity, but does nothing to alleviate the odd sense of vertigo suffered by players that look through the cracks in the boarded-up windows of the house and realize they all look out onto different streets, even when looking through different cracks in the same window. Another eccentricity are the players themselves. Many variations of the playground game Manhunt have the teams split into 2, the hunters and the hunted. When a hunter finds one of the hunted, they become a hunter too. Any hunted left at midnight win the game. However, whenever acolytes play the game, new hunters begin to join in the game. As the clock counts down towards midnight, they begin to manifest, and they do their very best to find the children, hunter and hunted alike. For whatever reason, they leave acolytes alone inside the manhunt house. The dull chattering and creaking of aged, stretched limbs in nearby corridors, or the heady scent of allspice wafting through the damp, earthy smell of decay that permeates manhunt house, are the only indications that they are present, aside from the screams of the children whom they have found, of course. And when acolytes are present, it seems as though they step up their game just to impress, just to make sure the acolyte knows how good they are at finding the children hiding themselves in the house that they built. When acolytes play, the game usually ends with every clock in Manhunt House ringing simultaneously, and you walking out of the house, alone, at midnight, after they have found all the children, to be met only by the silent, accusatory looks of a handful of parents too scared to scream blame in your direction. There is no consolation prize, no consolation at all, but you get to walk away with the photographs, one of which is a permanent reminder of the souls that were lost to the house so you could emerge the zero-sum victor. Congratulations, you win. 82. The Islet Collection. Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum is considered one of the best museums in Scotland, not least of which because of its varied and evocative exhibits. From rooms themed on natural history to ancient Egypt, and galleries featuring Dutch painters to the Glasgow boys, there's something for anyone to enjoy inside, even acolytes. Go to the cafe and order a bottle of water at the counter. Do not take a bottle of water from the fridge, as they have not been prepared or treated with the appropriate ritual. One of the staff will give you a bottle from behind the counter, seemingly identical to those in the fridge, for £1.50. Take the bottle and go to a secluded part of the museum, such as a cubicle in the toilets, to prepare your solution. Drink or pour out some of the liquid in the bottle, and then add allspice to the remainder. The more allspice is used, the stronger the solution will become. Mix the allspice in, then apply the liquid to your eyes. A fierce burning sensation will result, the intensity of which depends on how strong the solution is. But as a result, whenever you close your eyes for the next hour or so, you will be able to see dim, glowing auras behind your eyelids that seem to emanate from certain objects inside the museum. Tour the museum, and every so often, close your eyes and observe the colors that radiate behind your eyelids, like emotionally charged afterimages of the museum's artifacts. Objects that are infused with a high degree of occult significance will seem to cause the colors behind your eyelids to twist and swirl in iridescent whirlpools. These artifacts should be studied and understood where possible. In many cases, the reasons why these objects bear such intense energy is not understood. Why do the sketches for Dolly's Christ of St. John of the Cross all glow with immaterial chromatics, yet the full painting itself does not? Why do some of the rooms of the dollhouse like art objects from the World War II exhibit seem to resonate with the fell radiance? Why does the Spitfire in the museum seem to be dripping and bleeding color onto all the objects below? Not all of the objects in the Kelvingrove Museum are simply static artifacts to be studied. Some are dynamic, and allow a certain rapport to build between yourself and the thing being observed. If you would prefer not to invite the gaze of certain entities that would otherwise turn a blind eye to you, do not open your eyes in front of the painting that seem to drink and devour the colors behind your eyelids. Looking at their canvases through your stained eyes will result in something turning its own to stare into yours. 88. The Glass Bones. Of the two divinatory systems closely linked to the city of Glasgow, the Glass Bones is the lesser known. Its association with working-class magic makes it seem uncivilized to those who prefer the much more dangerous and much more sought-after Glasgow Tarot. Nonetheless, to those acolytes who would seek answers only the spirit of the city can give, the glass bones are an indispensable tool. First, the acolyte must take a glass bottle of alcohol and draw a perimeter around his turf with the alcohol. If the acolyte runs out, they can continue using another bottle of the same drink. It is important that the line of alcohol remains as unbroken as possible, and that the bottle is empty before the next step is undertaken. The acolyte must then break the bottle. It is said that the higher the bottle is thrown from, and it must be thrown, not meekly dropped, the more of the city the bottle can see. This can be played to the acolyte's advantage. Those who seek secrets throughout all the city may find it best to throw it from the roof of a block of flats, but those who seek to become the new provost or royal for their street, neighborhood, or burg may opt to throw the bottle from a first or second story window. The bottle must hit a surface within the perimeter of the alcohol, but it does not matter if that surface is a street, roof, or wall. When the bottle breaks, the ground inside the alcohol perimeter becomes sacred ground to the acolyte. The acolyte must then collect every piece of glass from the broken bottle, collect them together, and cut each piece on their flesh, so that every shard can drink its owner. Agony results, but results can only come through agony. Finally, the acolyte must make themselves drunk on the same alcohol as the type used in the rites. During the drunken haze which follows, the acolyte will be granted inspiration in vino veritas, whereupon they will be able to accurately describe every single shard of glass as having a different particular meaning, set of association, zodiacal correspondences, and so on. It is pivotal that the acolyte record these as best they can during their drunken state. Afterwards, it will be impossible to tell accurately which shard describes what. The acolyte, after having performed these steps, has gained his own set of glass bones, a set of glass shards which can be collected together and used in fortune-telling and divination like a set of rune stones. When asked questions and thrown, the acolyte will be able to divine meaning in the glass bones provided they are under the effects of the same alcohol as the type held in the bottle that made the oracle. A warning about the glass bones. The acolyte must avoid throwing them for divination under the influence of another kind of alcohol. Doing so results in the acolyte puking up a new set of ready-made glass bones. Similarly, there is always one shard that goes unmarked by any acolyte, and any acolyte that claims to have named theirs is lying. When this shard appears in a reading, the acolyte must immediately cease reading, take the bones, and find a safe place to hide. The unmarked bone will cut through the safe consensus reality that the acolyte so often takes for granted and rip a splinter through their lifeline, inviting in sharp, cruel angels that herald the end of flesh, their voices echoing and reverberating through dimensions impossible to acknowledge, such that skin becomes water, water becomes glass, and the acolyte is rent asunder, his life torn from reality so that he goes unremembered and unmourned by all who knew him, except during certain melancholic drunken nights where the alcohol calls up hazy, incongruent memories of splintered spirits. 91. The night bus service. You've probably seen one of them if you've ever been in town late at night. A city bus with an electronic sign declaring "Sorry, I'm not in service," trundling restlessly by on the orange midnight roads. The bus is almost completely dark, save for a single lamp in the driver's cabin, like a glinting nightlight at the end of a shadowy hallway, pulling your attention in towards it. And then you see them, the silhouette of a person sitting in the back seat of the bus, completely shrouded in darkness. You will, as all people have done, rationalize it away, just a trick of the light, or a person who was on the other side of the bus, or a reflection in the window. You might even be right, but most times, you'd be wrong. The N14 night bus is an enigma even to the people that use it for the unique travel route it offers. Bus companies will insist that there is neither a 14 or N14 bus on their service, though occasionally out-of-date leaflets can be found that indicate an N14 service makes a single stop, station Glasgow, and only has one service at precisely 04 at Buchanan Street Bus Station from stance 28. And so, to board, you must go to the Buchanan Street Bus Station before 04 and wait at stance 28. Provided there is at least one person at the station by 04, the bus will trundle into the station, an unassuming teal and beige single-deck bus with dim lighting and no passengers. The driver's cabin is fairly well illuminated, but the driver herself, positioned as she is under the lamps, is swathed in shadows. The only discernible features are her frame, indicating she is female, frizzy red hair bunched around her head, and what seems to be a broad, cutting grin. The rest of the bus is badly lit by comparison, and an assortment of what appears to be discarded rubbish litters the interior, from the floor to the seats, but owing to the insufficient light on the passenger side of the bus, they are indiscernible from the outside. The doors of the bus will open, and the driver will beckon you in. She asks for no fare, but she will incline her shadowed face to highlight her perpetual wry smile. It is customary to sit at the back of this bus. In so doing, you will see that what looked like rubbish from outside the bus is actually melted pools of wax, bundles of paper with bizarre drawings on them, circular metal discs with a dimple in the middle, filled with ash, and a number of strange steel pots with openings carved into them in ornate patterns. Custom again demands that you leave the objects where they lie, and take your seat immediately. When you are seated, the bus door will close, the lights in the entire vehicle will turn off, and the bus will pull out of the station. For the first portion of the journey, the route is recognizable to most who are familiar with the city: North Hanover Street, Bath Street, Renfield Street, West George Street, George Square, but after a few minutes, a realization will dawn on the mind of the passenger: the bus is going round in circles. And as soon as this realization is reached, the bus turns down an unfamiliar street, slows to a stop, and the driver gets up. Working her way from the front to the back of the bus, the driver, still cloaked in shadows, will set down lit white candles on the seats of the bus, along the baggage shelves above the seats, and on the floor of the carriage. She will place sticks of incense in the metal discs, incense holders, and will light the incense inside the steel pots, incense braziers. She may throw you another grin as she sets the final candle down on the seat beside you, before she returns to the front of the bus and resumes the journey. On this final part of the bus journey, the passenger will not recognize any of the streets, though they will all seem somewhat familiar. The architecture of buildings redolent of the apartments of the West End, some tight side streets resembling the close, cramped lanes in the city center, a view of water indicative of proximity to the River Clyde. Occasionally, the outside world is not visible at all, owing to trick plays of light from the candles, casting fractal colors onto the windows of the carriage, brightening them up like incandescent stained glass, or else the wispy clouds of allspice-scented incense smoke blanketing the windows completely as they wind through the carriage, creating a heady atmosphere that at once feels somnolent and suffocating. The hypnotic metronome of the carriage suspension groaning, the reliable tilt of the bus as it turns left and right, and left, and right, and left, and right, takes you in and takes you over. Slowly wading into a drift of sleep, you will feel your vision swim, your attention sink, your thoughts disperse as though rid on water, and, upon closing your eyes, the bus will judder to a halt, pulling you out from the cusp of sleep, and the doors will clatter open. With the smoke of burning incense filling the carriage, it is impossible to see the stop through the windows, but invariably, when you step out of the bus, you will find yourself on an empty suburban street, filled with buildings of various construction, all painfully familiar, like a recollection from a recurrent nightmare, under thunderous orange and purple storm clouds. "This is stained Glasgow," the driver will say, in a voice that buzzes in the electric air, and the bus will be terminating here. The bus will depart, and until the next time you fall asleep, you may explore the warped streets of stained Glasgow, the archetypal memory, dream and reflection of past and present Glasgows. Without guidance, however, the acolyte may well fall prey to those things that stand hidden in the spaces darkened by the city's Jungian shadows. 93. The Sacred Ground. There is a patch of disused land where a church once stood in the south side of Glasgow. The ground has grown wild and untamed since the church was demolished, and due to its previous use as a holy site, can now be used as sacred ground. Note that this does not mean it provides any kind of sanctuary from some of the entities that thrive in the darkness of the city. The creations of shadow farmers can set foot on the soil. The silent man can pass through the iron gate. The scavenger's daughter will still find you, and they will be able to follow you there. The real boon of the sacred ground is its use to practitioners. Because the Gideon keys of Glasgow have been interwoven so tightly with Christian mythology, certain elements of each system come together on the grounds of the former church. Mixing water with allspice on the grounds will create a kind of holy water which, when applied to the islets, will allow acolytes to detect those things in people who have heavy significance in the living mythology of Glasgow. A number of the mushrooms growing amongst the weeds can be ingested to give hallucinogenic trips that reveal the fundamental mycological reality that lies underneath our own. Rites held on the ground seem to have a much stronger effect, perhaps due to the things that are buried beneath. The acolyte must avoid the area on rainy nights. Unknown figures sometimes congregate in the grass, digging up cadavers from the soil, and it can be harrowing to see your own body being dragged up from the dirt. 94. The Spiral Hall. The main body of an email.
Hey again. I hope you don't mind me emailing you, but I need yours and Eileen's help more than ever. I know you might not want to get into something like this after what happened to Dominic, but I need you to come round to Cumbernauld, and soon. There's something not right here, and I need someone to help me before the spiral hall manifests. You know Cumbernaulds dead at the best of times. The place reeks of depression and desperation, and it's starting to really get to me. The town was built in the 52nds as a kind of residential overspill zone for Glasgow. And since every aspect of it was planned by the government, it doesn't have any kind of pulse. When you stand on Buchanan Street, listening to the swarms of people chatting around you, sensing the vibration of the traffic and the subway trains under your feet, and feeling the wind and rain lashing and blasting through the alleyways and avenues, you can tell Glasgow's alive. Breathing and shouting and screaming. In Cumbernauld, all you can hear is a death rattle. If there's such thing as a spirit of the city, ours was stillborn. Dead things rot, Alexander, and there's a rot that's settled in the town center. You know how all the residential areas are built around the shopping center, that massive eyesore? That's basically Cumbernaulds' version of Buchanan Street, the dead heart of the city. The whole thing looks like it was built inside out. The bones and bowels everted, all the things that are normally obscured and hidden away from the public, like service areas. Ugly brick facades and aged decor are thrown right to the forefront for everyone to see. The building itself doesn't even look like a shopping center. It looks like an angular, austere 72nds municipal building, with the people around it consigned to despair. You know how you get those shoppers who just seem to traipse and amble along, without ever seeming like they're really conscious of where they are or where they're going. They're not junkies. Well, not always. They're like the Walking Dead. Well, I was in the shopping center one night. It was practically empty, and I was walking down a long, straight corridor behind one of those people when they suddenly stopped about 2 meters in front of me. And then she turned to her right, just staring over to the wall, except the wall was completely gone. Instead, there was what I can only describe as being a hallway spiral. It was like looking down a stairwell that vertically grown from where the wall used to be into a colossal architectural ammonite, an Escher corridor stretching and circling, endlessly orbiting and eventually terminating in some nauseating singularity. I felt ill looking at it. And worse, I could feel something looking back at me from the other end of that spiral. It was a rotten, festering wound in the dead body of the city, and it was infested with something. The person in front of me shuffled towards the corridor spiral in that addled, slow way, and I never even tried to stop them. God knows I thought about it, but I wanted to see what happened. I wanted to see how the spiral worked, how someone could possibly navigate that thing, and she did it. She shuffled over to the corridor, and within seconds, she was on it, turning down that impossible gyrating insanity, being devoured by its incongruent geometry. I saw her just keep trundling along, her limbs beginning to warp and twist, her neck elongating and her skin splaying out at odd angles all the way down the hallway. I couldn't take my eyes away from it. Not until the last moment, when something rose from the bottom of the corridor, announced by a far-off vibration. A maddened, hysterical scream of sheer panic delight, the sound of fragile sanity finally cracking and echoing over eternal, endless walls. The sense of movement from the inevitable terminus of that hellish spiral was enough to throw me into a sense of bile-inducing horror. I couldn't bear to look at the thing that was coming screaming up from the depths of that hallway, tearing its way up the spiral and violating the distorted, mangled frame of that lost woman in a way I couldn't even describe, before rushing up the hallway towards me. I had to run, Alexander, out of the hallway, out of the town center, and all the way back to my flat. I'm sorry I dumped all this on you, but I'm fucking terrified. The hallway in my flat has started to twist. The floor in my bedroom doesn't match up with the hall anymore. And when I'm in there, I can hear something from far away, screaming and laughing at me. Please help. Please, please help. I don't know what to do. Alan Strachan.
100. The contrary line. The contrary line is an impossible railway line running under Glasgow. Each part of the line, each contrary station, is not spatially connected to another. Instead, the contrary line is a purely conceptual framework that allows travel between several different points throughout Glasgow, a psychogeographical walkway that takes the acolyte to a place most in tune with their subconscious mind. To ride the contrary line, the acolyte must first locate a contrary station. These are found all over the city of Glasgow, but are difficult to find. Acolytes that do find one often mark it as such using graffiti that only another acolyte would recognize, usually a pictogram of another Gideon key near the entranceway that allows access to the contrary line. Indeed, many of the locations described and documented in the Gideon keys contain a contrary station nearby. The acolyte must then lead themselves into a highly associative mental state. This can be achieved in various different ways. Many acolytes opt to meditate on the graffiti at prominent contrary station, and several stations have graffiti created by acolytes for this explicit purpose. Look for related motifs arranged in a web-like pattern near an entrance into a dark or underground passage, and focus on unlocking the elements that link them all together. Other acolytes choose to compose spontaneous, nonsensical poetry in a stream of consciousness style, or carry books written in free association for that purpose. The acolyte must then venture into the opening at a contrary station, all the while contemplating interrelated symbols, ideas and themes that mesh together in various ways. Focusing exclusively on one specific idea will prevent the contrary line taking effect. Sleight of mind is a requirement. Using the acolyte's generation of interwoven ideas, the contrary line will transport the acolyte to the station most closely aligned with the topic that is linking together most of the acolyte's thoughts, with a vast majority of these stations existing partway or entirely in stained Glasgow. Those who focus on disease will travel to the contrary station at the Chapel of Our Lady of the Gory Bell. Those who focus on escape will find themselves in Trenchdon, halfway between the only known exits of Rutherglen Rig. Those who focus on uncovering secrets will find themselves trapped in a dark, metal room with a slowly rising water level and the man in the tower, and, though they may not realize before too late, they are also deeply asleep. Travelers beware, do not let your thoughts focus too heavily on death. This is almost unavoidable for those new to exploring the darker spaces of Glasgow, who cannot help contemplating the danger they may be in. Those whose minds resonate too strongly with death will be brought to the High Street Bone railway station, and may witness atrocities that force them not only to accept their inevitable termination, but welcome it, and rightly so. In the world above, there is no recuperation for a mind lost to the Bone railway station. 101. The tunnels. While it's true that the public are somewhat clued into the existence of the tunnels beneath the streets of Glasgow, most are unaware of any of the entrances to the network and the extent to which the tunnel system spans the city. This is fortunate, as even fewer are aware of the things that stalk the shadowy, claustrophobic depths of the underground tunnels. One of the main tunnels runs from the crypts in Glasgow Cathedral all the way to Rutherglen in the southeast. This tunnel has the nickname of the Rutherglen Rig. There are anecdotal stories of a piper who ventured into this tunnel alongside his dog, all the while playing his bagpipes in order to allow his associates above ground to trace the pathways of the tunnel. Halfway through, the sound of his piping disappeared completely. The piper's associates ran to the other end of the tunnel and waited for him. Hours later, the only thing that emerged was the piper's dog, shaking, squealing, and shivering, with every strand of fur torn from its flesh. Contemporary accounts of urban explorers corroborate one part of this story. Sometimes, people who enter the rig just don't come out. Nonetheless, in an emergency, the rig does provide an easy means of escape from the city center on rainy days when they are abroad. There is another tunnel in Glasgow, accessible only from the now defunct Glasgow Green railway station. A hatch in the street nearby leads down through the roof of the building below, where one will find oneself on precisely the platform required to ride the contrary line, an impossible railway line that includes the High Street Bone Railway among its stops. Though no train ever runs on it, the only traffic it sees travels by foot, acolytes and pilgrims looking for the stations in alternate Glasgows glimpsed only in the throes of fever. Another important tunnel lies somewhere underneath the centermost streets of Glasgow. In fact, this particular tunnel has entered public consciousness, as many natives to the city will be aware of the existence of a completely preserved Victorian street, with old shop fronts still standing, having been built over by one of the larger streets but kept intact. The cobblestone road is flanked by small pavements of concrete, and the wooden veneers of a pharmacy, dentist, tobacconist, and post office lie quiet and undisturbed in their dusty sleep beneath the streets above. Various accounts claim it lies beneath Hope Street, Union Street, or Argyle Street. Slightly more savvy individuals place it under Glasgow Central Station. The village of Grahamston once lay outside the city of Glasgow before it was demolished in order to make way for the station, and the Grant Arms pub, only a few yards from the station itself, is a still standing relic of the village. These estimates are partially true. In fact, the tunnels one must traverse to find the underground street lie under each of these locations. The Postal Network tunnel under Hope Street is accessed through the heavy load elevator in Glasgow Central Station near platforms 11-15. The tunnels split under Union Street, and one tunnel leads down Argyle Street, connecting the sub-basements of shops and department stores on the street above. By going down a waterlogged sub-basement on the southern side of the tunnel, one can find the underground street. The street is well preserved, largely because each of the shops are still in use, run by eccentrics and visited only by acolytes. Alas, we are here to speak only of the tunnels. The underground establishments are another matter entirely. 102. The borstal. When people witness or undergo traumatic events, it can damage a person's psyche to such an extent that the wound never quite goes away, cracking and bursting open afresh if it is probed and broken by a triggering incident. It has long been suggested that places, too, can develop scars from disturbing ordeals that may be torn and bleed freely once again with particular triggers. In other words, they become haunted. The alleged crimes undertaken at the Larchgrove Borstal are severe. From the 1950s onwards, boys who had committed criminal acts, and even some who had only been implicated in such, were sent to remand homes like that at Larchgrove. From the testimony of those staying at the Borstal, the conditions were apparently nightmarish, and routine physical and mental abuse were inflicted on the boys by staff members and by other inmates. Many purportedly committed more serious crimes inside the Borstal's walls in the hope of being transferred to an adult prison purely to escape the constant threat of violence and violation inside the Borstal. The sheer volume of psychological and emotional trauma delivered at Larchgrove has resulted in a splinter of the area's psychogeography, a kind of recurring insanity that only requires certain triggers to cause unnatural phenomena such as what people think of as ghosts to appear, much as a person who had suffered some heinous event such as rape or torture may be shocked into emotional breakdown by a trigger such as certain words, descriptions, people, or similar. Whenever blood is shed at Larchgrove, the building may go mad. Ghosts of past events, skewed and exaggerated by the emotional turmoil of scores of hormonal, adolescent young men, become distorted, degenerated, and warped into horrific monsters of brutality and torture glimpsed in the mirrors, windows, and flickering lights of the Borstal. Old hallways suffer schizoid breaks and splinter off into new, hellish spatial dimensions occupied by entities measured in pain ladders. New gods of primal fear, fed by the inverted faith of the suffering along the umbilical tension in the air, gestate behind the walls, thrashing in their sleep before birth. Many acolytes of darker purpose supposedly used the Borstal as a torture chamber for their enemies after it was closed down, their only tool being the raw, weeping psychosis that the building even now suffers from. With its reopening and repurposing, it has been made more difficult for anyone to use the former borstal in such a way. Positive gains can be made from even this profoundly negative phenomenon. Much as psychologists use the abnormal psychology of particular people in case studies to illuminate the inner workings of the human mind, so too can the savvy acolyte use the incidents at the former borstal to gain insight into how physical locations think or live. Much experimental work has already gone underway in the borstal nowadays. The building is used as an employability center with an adjoining nursery, but there's said to be a certain room, kept locked to all but a core group of acolytes, wherein experiments are performed with a black-handled knife to plumb the building's deep mind and detail its darkest corners. 103. The Duke Shadows. Scrawled on a piece of lined A4 paper, over a paragraph, which abruptly stops 3 sentences in, written in pencil about the effects of the passing of some piece of legislation.
Hey dude, don't have long to write. You weren't in and I don't have your new number, so I'm going to go in alone. Weird conversation starter, but Steph once said how she couldn't sleep during her period because she kept having nightmares, and a lot of them were about shadow people in her flat. One time she told me that even when she was awake she thought she could sometimes see someone looking at her through the gap in the bathroom door when it was left open just slightly at night. Now today I was studying in the library and I found this book about weird shit in Glasgow. One of the stories talked about a house in Duke Street where some guy's kids were playing with a black dog that they thought was weird because it never wagged its tail and it was impossible to touch it, and a policeman later saw the same dog. The guy also had encounters with a shadow that was a human but missing a hand, and his wife slept and talked with a shadow at the end of her bed while she was having a nightmare. It gave me the chills cause I thought of Steph. Apparently her flat stands on the grounds of the old Duke Street prison, too, and our tutor was talking about that place in politics a while ago, how there was some fucked up shit going on with the prisoners being severely abused and basically tortured. It became a women's prison a while after Barlany was built, and then they closed it and knocked it down. I'm writing to you cause I remember you told me about those things you saw when you cut your hand in that place in Easterhouse. You said they were like Hiroshima shadows of the mind instead of the body. That was fucked up, dude. Haha. I'm heading round to Steph's flat just now to see if I can bring them out with blood. If anything happens, I'll let you know. Dumb.
105. The Crossroads Right. Something happened on one of the crossroads at French Street. Constituent pieces of folklore mesh together around that crossroads that map a gory and haunting history, but those in the know refuse to comment upon it. How the specifics of the ritual came to light, such as the participants' names, is unknown. Someone, somewhere must know the truth. Visit the crossroads on Monday about an hour before sunrise with 2 other people. Each person must stand on a different part of the crossroads. On the empty corner, place the entrails of a mammal. The canopic bag gives the best results. The ritual must be performed like a play, where each person has a different persona to adopt. One person must at all times be addressed as Brian. Another is Margaret. The last is Stephen. Their surnames are not given here, but they are easy for acolytes to discover, as they have since become bywords in the occult community in Glasgow. It is pivotal that actors make the performance as realistic as possible, and they must never break character, otherwise, the ritual will fail, bringing into being certain entities that otherwise remain bound to the crossroads. Brian must turn to Margaret and say, "Margaret, you have to put her out of her misery." Margaret responds, "I never agreed to this." Stephen must then say, "I'll bring her through," and walk to the entrails, picking them up with his bare hands, preferably while saying, "Here we go, girl, let's go see your mum." He must then bring the entrails to Margaret and set them down at her feet. Margaret must bend to the ground and devour the entrails, whole. Nothing must remain. When she is finished, Stephen and Brian must pull her to her feet and lead her down the street. Once the ritual is complete, the person who played Margaret will be forever sterile or barren, and cancerous cells will begin to grow in their brain. However, this tumor will slowly coalesce into something like an organ, and this organ brings with it a series of bizarre powers, such as the ability to cause spontaneous epileptic seizures in people purely by focusing on them. Incidentally, there are people with the same first and second names as the 3 original members of the ritual, who are said to be enjoying successful careers with a certain law enforcement body. 106. The Corpuscular Brick. In Shawlands, there was once a field known as the Good Man's Croft to farmers and villagers. This field was deliberately left to grow wild without having a crop planted in it, so that the good man, the devil, could use it to entertain his malevolent company and leave the crops on the other fields alone. Once set aside, it could not be claimed again. If crops were sown, they would be blighted. If animals were put to pasture, they would be stricken and die. It can be inferred that the Good Man's Croft is now part of Pollock Country Park south of the city. There are a number of strange phenomena occurring in Pollock Country Park, all stemming from the area's notorious links to demon and black magic. But one particular phenomenon is of great interest to many acolytes. In a part of the park where there are very few trees around, there is a medium-sized mound, with a muddy earthen ring surrounding it where no grass ever grows. If one stands atop this mound at midnight on a night where the rain is particularly heavy and aims a pair of binoculars due west, there may be a chance you will spot a figure stalking along the tree line. The figure is often very difficult to make out, but many acolytes have described it as moving erratically, as though it makes its way by twitching and spasming forward. Its skin appears to be stretched across its skeletal frame, with thick knots of bone throbbing from thin, fragile-looking bone shafts that look far too weak to withstand its manic thrashes. The figure moves around the wooded areas, looking for something in between its juddering spasms. Eventually, it will stop at the base of a tree, dig down into the earth, and plant something there before covering it back up with soil. Unfortunately, due to your elevated position atop the mound, it is more than likely that the figure will see you, and once it does, it will freeze for only a few seconds as it fixates on you. You have only a few seconds to run to the place it dug up, and it will be thrashing its way back towards it in order to prevent you from seizing its treasure. The figure is fast, and the figure is precise. Before you realize it is upon you, square chunks will fall away from your still gushing flesh as it guts you with strange bony tendrils that shred, cut, pierce, and carve. If you manage to rip its treasure up from the soil before the frenzied creature reaches you, you will discover that the treasure is a brick-like cuboid, made entirely of warm, fleshy, muscular corpuscles inside a mesh of thin but durable bones, which quiver and shake in response to your touch. If you transfuse blood from the sinewy brick, you will find yourself healthier and more energetic over time, more alert, and more awake. However, there is always a chance you might have seized a bad brick and will suffer from anything from HIV to leukemia for the rest of your life. Many would suggest this is no different to your chances when you first come into the world, and who would turn down the chance of a better, healthier body. 110. The bookstore. There is a hidden bookstore that can be found in every city on the continent. In Glasgow, it can be found in a close on Dumbarton Road in Partick. Approach the door to the flat and press the buzzers for one ground floor flat, one first floor flat, and one second floor flat simultaneously. When a voice from the buzzer asks who is there, tell them you were actually looking for access to the basement. A sharp peal of electrical buzzing will indicate that the door is open, and you can then step through into a musty, dimly lit shop run by a woman named Judith Christchurch. The shop specializes in the works penned by people driven mad by religious revelation, with documents detailing impossible mythologies across the United Kingdom, the Eucharist of St. John Barleycorn, the new matter of Britain, the underground angels, and the vibrational frequencies of the Avebury megalithic radios are described in painstaking detail amid frenzied, tangential prose. Judith sells these documents for a reasonable price, and despite their varied comprehensibility, they each have something that can be of use to acolytes. However, there are other services available at the bookstore. Behind the counter, Christchurch keeps a series of glass cases filled with notebooks, journals, sketchbooks, and photo albums, and the like. All have been prepared by acolytes and all describe the atrocities and splendor that we who seek the truth delight in. Christchurch will let you have one of these. For a price, you must prepare one of your own. If you don't, you will find yourself unable to read anything. The words will wash away before your eyes, rearranging themselves into images of bizarre oceanic landscapes and vague anatomical structures. 111. The Drowning Chapel. St. Enoch's Square, in the city center, is primarily known for the St. Enoch Center, one of the city's indoor malls, and St. Enoch subway station. Amongst historians, it is known for being the approximate location of an old chapel dedicated to St. Thenu, the mother of the city's patron saint, St. Mungo, which housed ancient relics, and a well where offerings were made in petition to the heavens. There is no chapel, or well, anywhere on St. Enoch's Square. In fact, the chapel is under St. Enoch's Square, and is only accessible through the subway station by walking south on the tracks. As such, it is advisable to wait until after 11:35 p.m., when the last train terminates in Gavin, to begin the walk to the Drowning Chapel. The tunnel south of St. Enoch Station is damp. The ground gets wetter as one walks along due to rivulets and streams of water feeding in from the cracks in the sodden, moldy walls, so it is next to impossible to get to the chapel without getting one's feet wet. After 10 minutes of walking south, the seeker will notice a large, filth-stained crack in the wall, with light coming from within. On the other side is a room, much taller than it is wide, half filled with mud, dirt, and dust from the earth above. Inside the muck are cracked stone pillars, decayed wooden paneling, meshes of metal poles and structures, the last remnants of the St. Thenu Chapel. Water continually cascades in from each of the walls, making the whole room seem to shiver, quake, and struggle. And, in the center of the room, lies the well, illuminated by an orange luminescence coming from a hole in the ceiling above. Straight metal bars on the hole indicate that it is a drain in the street. The well is filthy, and a number of objects lie inside and around it, many, most likely, from having been dropped through the drain above. Curiously, no rubbish has come in through the drain, or if it has been cleaned away by persons unknown. All that remains are the strange offerings, dolls, all with their left hands cut or ripped off. Photographs of people with holes stabbed through in a straight line through the center of their bodies. Plastic bags, some with small bones poking out of holes inside them, tied up with red elastic bands. It is said that making a sacrifice inside the drowning chapel, in accordance with certain passages found inside the Old Testament, allows the user to petition for divine vengeance against any mortal man who has transgressed the 10 Commandments. 116. The fungal bloom. There is a house in Bearston that lies condemned, but this is not immediately obvious from the outside. It cannot be demolished as there would be too much disruption to the homes it is connected to, and the door and windows of the house cannot be welded shut, because residents of the neighborhood felt it would cast a stigma over the area and petitioned for it to stay empty. Nowadays, people have all but forgotten about the strange house, and it would be entirely unnotable were it not for the thing that was responsible for it being condemned, the fungus. The house has become a home for a persistent, interminable mold that covers vast swaths of the ceiling, walls, and floors. The fungus is so prevalent that acolytes will not realize that none of the rooms are carpeted. Wherever you walk in the house, you are walking on a bed of mold, which releases small clouds of dust like spores as you tread atop it. The master bedroom on the upper floor is murky and difficult to see in, due to the descent of millions of spores falling like snow from the ceiling. Breathing in this room invites respiratory problems that come accompanied with persistent, recurring visions of people made out of mushrooms standing around you, watching you with absent faces. The bathroom on the lower floor is the nexus of the bizarre infestation. From the plug holes of the sink and bath, long, pallid fungal stalks rise up to a foot in height, crowned by pale yellow cone-like heads. The shower head has stalks growing down from it, which curl up at the ends like hooks. The mirror over the sink has shattered, with a wrinkled, tumor-like mushroom growth sprouting through the glass. The toilet has become a throne for the fungal bloom. Thick wreaths of white and beige flesh has burst out of the broken cistern, leaking trails of amber pus into a greasy puddle around the stained white ceramic. The U-bend has become a vase for a fungus so large it could easily be mistaken for a tree, its fleshy bark white and tender, topped with the sickly yellow cone of the thinner stalks in the bath and sink. Entering the bathroom causes a subtle change in the fungus. It almost seems to quiver at your presence. The stalks sway from side to side, the fungal face in the mirror twists and flexes, and the tree-like growth seems to shudder. Approach the growth in the toilet bowl and grasp a limb or stalk from the fungus. The flesh will tear off quite easily. Chewing and swallowing the stalk will cause vivid hallucinations of an impossibly vast parallel reality made of endless, juddering fungi, writhing and rubbing against each other in a mass mycological breeding conclave. This is the fundamental reality under our own, and the fungi release spores that cause us to hallucinate the world that we perceive every day. The stalk allows a brief glimpse into that true world, grants us the chance to walk under the cyclopean caverns formed out of the bulbous skin of megafungi, lets us see the forests of colossal mold trees lit up by the otherworldly blue and green light of luminal rot. It is paramount that the acolyte does not become addicted to these altered states of consciousness. Although that world is filled with painful beauty and unfathomable wonder, it won't take long for someone to notice that you have awoken. 118. The hairy icon. In Govan, there are a set of docks that were once used to house ships that were undergoing repairs on the River Clyde. The docks have been abandoned since 1988, and it shows access is possible to the site, but it is no longer regularly maintained by council services. The water in the 3 bays has become dirty and filled with rubbish. The grass and weeds have pulled their way up through cracks in the stonework to overrun the ground. The dock does see some activity by a group of acolytes. However, on the first Sunday of every month, they gather in the burned-out building at the far side of the dock, provided it isn't raining, and newcomers are welcome to visit and join in on their pet project. From Clydebury Street, the acolyte must climb through a damaged metal fence and traipse along a path well worn by both the acolytes and the Neds and Chavs that occasionally invade the area. On the Sundays that the acolytes meet, you may find them swimming in the dingy, rank water of the basins where the ships used to undergo maintenance. Their faces are turned down into the murky black water and trying to make as little body movements as possible, lest they disturb the thing they're looking for. From the top of the basins, they look like floating corpses. Occasionally, one will rear up out of the water, holding his hand up and displaying the prize to the rest of the group, a clump of hair, often with a moldy, bloated piece of rotted, white scalp flesh attached. The scalp pieces are tossed over to one side of the basin, landing with a wet splat atop the stone, bleeding water. One acolyte, Mark Wilson, a man in his 30s, usually dressed in neutral grays and greens and sporting a haunted, anxious look, will take any newcomers to the partially burned down building on the docks, where, in one of the ruined rooms, the hairy icon awaits. Stepping into the room alerts your every sense that something is wrong. At the center of a room with more open spaces than walls is a human-sized object suspended by a metal framework of girders and hooks in lieu of a roof. Upon first viewing, its essence is impossible to tell, and as such, the conscious mind is assaulted and gripped by terror, unable to categorize what it is seeing but failing to comprehend. But as Mark brings you closer, you can see that it is a vaguely human-shaped entity. There is a definite outline of a head, only it seems to be several heads, all clustered together into one huge mass covered by long streaks of dank, ragged hair that reek of sewage and piss. Occasionally, the mass will judder as though gripped by a sudden shiver, but different parts of the body will spasm at different times, resulting in a full-body contortion of horrific angles that makes the entity sway dangerously from the creaking, roaring metalwork above it. The entity is silent but for the sound of wreaths of dirty, spindly hair tracing up against itself, like whispers of something hiding deep inside, and occasionally a bizarre crunch or squelch, as though possessed of some digestive process. Mark will explain that he and his team have been finding pieces of scalp with human hair attached in the docks for 2 years, all from the same person. Only, there's too much for it to be one ordinary person. And so, by examining each of the pieces of flesh, Mark has begun to construct a patchwork reconstruction of the Inconudala dock. So far, the hairy icon has a mass. Had 4.5 mounds of hairy flesh, which Mark believes may be faceless heads. Mark has also claimed that by the time the second head was constructed, the hairy icon experienced limited self-locomotion. By the fourth, he was able to communicate with it in some fashion, although he never explains how. He hopes that by the seventh head, the hairy icon may be able to be taught not to devour the people that come too close to it, and that the bloody maw filled with human viscera and tangled hair on its underside may shrivel up after lack of use. After that, he will petition to have the hairy icon canonized, Saint Jennifer, after his late girlfriend and the hairy icon's first known victim, and establish a church right there, on the blasted grounds of the Govan docks. 120. The Flesh Chorus. In Ibrox, southwest of the center of the city, there is a small set of flats considered unfit for residence by the local government, and even by homeless people in the area. Nonetheless, they visit the flat as part of an urban saint feast day to pay respect to the Flesh Chorus. The crumbling brownstone flats are inaccessible from the front, the door lies hidden behind a panel of solid steel, and every one of the windows of the building's 3 stories are similarly blocked. The flats immediately to the left and right of the block stretch out to each end of the street, allowing no way around. However, on Wednesdays, the rubbish bins for the flats adjacent to the condemned flat are emptied, and the front and back doors are often left open, and this is the only way through. Walking down through one of the adjacent flats closes and out through the back door leads to the back gardens. Scaling a wall allows the acolyte to access the back garden and the back door of the condemned flat. Once inside the condemned block, the route to take is marked out on the walls of the tenement. Arrows have been etched into the eroding stone, alongside a gallery of various bizarre images, chalk drawings of the Virgin Mary, trapped inside her own halo, depictions of arms in weeping white paint, multiple motifs of women holding accordions, and a particularly harrowing scrawl, drawn using some kind of waxy substance, shows a tall figure in a coat, obscuring all its features save for square, blocky feet, standing at the end of a narrow corridor. The letters SHH are scribbled all around it. The hallway's imagery is made more unsettling by the continual murmurs and groans of multiple pitches and timbres that seem to emanate from somewhere upstairs. Following the arrows up a flight of stairs will bring the acolyte to an apartment that, despite its severe dilapidation and the various molds growing across the walls, is still apparently in use. In every room, accompanied by a heavy scent of ozone and the dull buzz of electricity, there are lamps and desk lights plugged into multi-sockets in the walls, torches and candles clustered together in corners on the floor, resulting in every room being unbearably bright, all except for one room, which has no illumination of its own, and it is from here that the sound of murmuring that permeates the flat seems to emanate. From the flickers of failing electrical lights and the guttering of days-old candles, the acolyte's eye will be drawn to a crack in the wall of this half-lit room, framed by curling, singed wallpaper and deteriorating plaster. Visible inside the crack is the right-hand side of a bare torso and lower body of a human figure. The head and legs are obscured behind the wall. The body behind the wall will judder and be thrown into spasm as you approach, perhaps disturbing the gentle and fragile play of light that it has become accustomed to. Unintelligible yelps and moans will echo out from the crack in the wall, the scrape of skin on stone punctuating its murmurs and mutters. The body will thrash more viciously the closer the acolyte gets, and, without timely intervention, blood will seep down the chest of the figure. The only way to prevent the body's thrashing is to approach with an outstretched hand. In so doing, the body will reduce its movement to a small tremble, and, with some difficulty, will pull its arm free from the crack in the wall and open its hand, to reveal a number of bloody teeth. Grab the arm by the wrist before it grabs you, and force it to drop the teeth. If they are crushed to a fine powder, burnt, then snorted, they will allow you to eat pain, gaining sustenance from your own suffering. Do not try to take the teeth from the hand directly. It will drop them, grab you by the wrist, and pull you in to join the flesh chorus. Victims dragged through the stone crack and squeezed into the tight, constricted and clammy gap behind the walls, unable to stand, unable to sit, unable to lie down, forced into painful positions of torturous interminability, and continuously chanting in groans of breathless, claustrophobic misery as they thrash against one another, unable to free themselves from their prison. The homeless men and women that attend to the flesh chorus on certain holy days attest that the bravest of them will venture into the flesh chorus on that day to try to get to the end of the row of quivering, groaning bodies, which terminates in an opening similar to the one they entered through, a crack in the walls of heaven. 122. The Saffron Room. Astral projection and remote viewing are two skills that are frequently denounced by many acolytes as being anything from unscientific down to outright fake. These acolytes, however, tend to be the types to extol pet theories and discuss matters with which they have little to no first-hand knowledge. Studying the Gideon keys of Glasgow requires an open mind, and any method that provides some insight, some understanding of the living mythology, should be regarded as useful. Besides, with the rules applied to the where, when and how of some of the Gideon key rituals, we must guard against armchair acolytes advising us to take up new sets of laws that do nothing but prevent exploration. Astral projection is not unlike dreaming, especially lucid dreaming. The acolyte must lead themselves into a state of relaxed focus, releasing their dependence of their mundane senses and trying to experience the world around them using only their imagination, their mind's eye, which is non-local and can travel across rooms, streets, cities, countries, worlds, and dimensions. In the city of Glasgow, there are many locations where employing this technique will allow the acolyte to venture into zones that are halfway between reality and whatever other worlds they choose to acknowledge. One such example is the Saffron Room. While sitting outside, the acolyte must will themselves into an altered state of consciousness to prepare their ascent to the Saffron Room. It is rumored that taking a hit of the Gideon's key drug, available from a lab in Paso Park, will make the trip easier, as will meditating on the flame of a certain brass candle that only appears in the city on the solstices and equinoxes. Meditate on the color saffron. Imagine a single point of pure, compressed color that slowly undulates up and down, and up and down. Watch as the point becomes a line that twists into a staircase. Feel the vertigo of the staircase that rises up and down, and up and down, the mental motion sickness that grows as you peer down endless corridors, walls that stretch up to the upper atmosphere and down to the ground, up and down, and up and down. It will take a while, but the architecture of the Saffron Room will glow visibly in the darkness of your mind's eye, bringing with it a hazy, yellow-tinted image of the city of Glasgow beneath it. The Saffron Room is actually a colossal, semi-transparent structure that spans the entire length of the city, visible from any point in Glasgow, and connected to several of its buildings and streets, in particular, a row of houses in Maryhill, the north of Buchanan Street, and a park in the south of the city. Depending on how long you can bear to watch, and the time of year, you may even see a number of figures walking the yellow halls, although they never seem to notice you. It is usually just as you notice one of the Saffron Room's inhabitants that a sense of nausea will infiltrate your meditation, a wave of sick shuddering that grips your bowels and throat. Perhaps, as the scientifically predisposed acolytes believe, your mind's eye is incapable of fully realizing the things you are perceiving with it, your mind becoming overwhelmed by bizarre geometry that violates physical science, laws of proportion that are so impossible for your brain to comprehend that it tries to prevent you looking. Or perhaps, as the more religious acolytes believe, the Saffron Room is simply purging your body of everything material so that you can ascend physically into the iridescent rooms of heaven above it. Most acolytes simply believe the most obvious answer, that it is a defense mechanism of the Saffron Room's inhabitants so that they can move about in their transcendent, sickening architecture. They seem to enjoy walking the hallways of the room that lead into people's homes. It is impossible to tell what they do while there, but there is always an aura of deep disequilibrium in those places that they have visited. A threatening feeling of intense intrusion and deep violation that hints at something approaching. 129. On gloom geometry. Have you heard of the shadow farmers? There are places in the city where shadows fall in such a way that they create biomass for other kinds of life. The feng shui crisscross of penumbras with slashes of light cutting perfectly across the network of shadows allows strange things to take root, but complete darkness, or complete brightness, will prevent their growth. Places that are exposed to the same level and orientation of light and dark are the best breeding grounds, abandoned places that no longer suffer human interference. Urban explorers tend to run into the work of the shadow farmers the most, though they do not always recognize it when they see it. Human silhouettes that seem to stalk them throughout their expedition, shadows that fall towards the light, the outline of a window where none are to be found. These are often written off as a trick of the light, which, in a way, is exactly what they are. The shadow farmers make new things out of the lack of light. Shadow people can easily be crafted from the silhouette of a single human body, which fulfills the shadow farmer's request. The angles of a building that suggest depth and perspective can form a hallway that allows access into people's darkened bedrooms at night through the shadows cast by lights outside their windows. The overlap of mesh and scaffolding can create a cage to imprison their enemies. The motion of a slow, grinding fan can create a method of execution for those same enemies. Fortunately, we have an ally. The shadow farmers are said to be opposed by a group who have discovered ways of permanently destroying things crafted through gloom geometry. Their methods include the use of sunlight reflected in hexagonal patterns, six-sided prism that split light into various color wavelengths that seem to expunge shadow when used alongside sounds that harmonize with those wavelengths. Unfortunately, it is a necessary consequence that those casting the strongest light will also create the strongest shadows. 130. The Green Grimoire. Part magical artifact, part posturing art school degree show project. The Green Grimoire is simultaneously an inspired supernatural tome and a sickening insight into how anything, regardless of taste and sensibility, can be drawn into the web of the occult. It is held in an underground art gallery, but rarely sees the light of day due to its odd effects on the psyche. The Green Grimoire is also known as the Folio and Das Garten, although the latter title is incorrect, both grammatically and due to the fact that the title belongs to a different book entirely. It is a small booklet of 30 pages of thick, handmade paper, bound to a cover that feels smooth, like the rubbery texture of fake plant leaves. On the first page is a name, D. MacDonald, then Glasgow School of Art. Near the bottom is a single word, folio. The rest of the book is given to drawings made up of words, images of ferns and trees made up from synonyms that branch out from one another in tangential leaves and stems, all written in various shades and colors. The whole work appears to be an exercise in combining stream of consciousness writing with pictorial typography. In fact, the Green Grimoire combines memetics with magic. The pictures of words are made in such a way that, when the reader consciously understands them, the seed of that picture takes root within their mind. An image of a wispy, frail-looking tree composed of synonyms for fear, deception, and paranoia will eventually grow inside the reader's neural forest, with the end result of them feeling constantly afraid and suspicious of the people around them. Dry, barren vistas made up of prickly calligraphy, and the word thirst can make the reader die from dehydration in an hour. A mushroom, one of the few images in the book to be shaded in, is made up of opposites and antonyms. Lies beside truth, illusion beside reality, black beside white. The mushroom provides fertile ground for schizophrenia to take root. Nobody knows the real effects of the willow comprised of the word they. Not all of the meme plants growing in the Green Grimoire are negative traits, though. Others include a row of sunflowers made up of happiness, confidence, and bliss. Pop is grown from dreams of the future, clairvoyance and second sight, and a tangle of weeds repeating one word, over and over in sprawling, creeping handwriting, eternal life. 137. The Riddle Quarant. There is an abandoned swimming pool in the south of Glasgow, which, due to the general disrepair of the building it is housed in, lies open to the skies. The pool sits empty and unused during dry weather, but on those nights where the rain seems to fall heavier than usual, the pool quickly fills up as rainfall trickles in through the dilapidated roof. It is during these nights that something takes up residence in the depths of the pool. The only way to gain access to the pool is through the roof. You must throw yourself into the black water below you, allow yourself to fall with the rain. As the water rises up around you, you will quickly realize that the water goes far, far deeper than you realize, and far further than is actually possible, judging from the depth of the darkened pool during dry weather. To meet the current of the pool, you must swim down as far as you physically can. If you are confident in the answer you intend to give the current, then you should consider weighing yourself down with concrete. When you swim down far enough that your breath begins to burn in your chest, when your lungs feel as though they're about to burst, you will hear a voice, quivering and vibrating out through the pool. This is the unseen current, who poses you a riddle. Within the hole you saw your whole environment contained, though nothing solid from within could ever be obtained. This mirror manifested, appearing as a guest did. Once the downpour started, and after it had rained. Once the sun had crested, no part of it remained. This far down, answering incorrectly or not at all means it will be impossible to resurface in time to take another breath. However, if you answer the current correctly, you will find yourself able to breathe underwater for far longer than should be humanly possible. 139. The Necropolis Lake. In the east of Glasgow there is a grassy hill, covered in graves, tombs, sepulchres, burial chambers, and mausoleums. This is the Necropolis, the city of the dead, and it is here that so much of Glasgow's bloody history is interred, dead or asleep. The acolyte that seeks truth will eventually make a venture into the Necropolis, to find that thing that sleeps in the soil beneath. Construction of the necropolis began in 1831 by the Merchants' House of Glasgow due to a high demand for burial space within the city thanks to a rising population and thus its rise in death toll. Before long, many prominent structures had arisen inside the extensive cemetery, such as monuments to prominent members of society who had passed on, mausoleums for wealthy families, and ornate statues of grieving angels. The necropolis is accessed by walking across the Bridge of Sighs, which once spanned the river that Glasgow was founded upon, now hidden away underground. The necropolis is quiet, like all graveyards, but its location on a hill, elevated above the heights of the city, gives it an air of liminal separation, a chill of isolation that is remarkably prevalent in the winter months. when fog obscures the rest of the city from view such that the only buildings that can be seen are those erected for the dead. The sounds of the city below fade away into the white shroud, and one can hear what sounds like the breathless whispers of the city of the dead. This is, in fact, the rushing of water deep beneath the soil of the cemetery, and it hints at one of the city's best-kept secrets, a secret that the acolyte that seeks the truth will find. At the entrance to the necropolis, immediately opposite the Bridge of Sighs, is a large stone facade, with doors that were initially designed to act as entrances to a tunnel with vaults inside the hill the necropolis is built on, largely to prevent body snatchers from gaining access to the recently buried. However, the tunnel was not completed, as frequent flooding inside the vaults made it difficult to build a safe, sanitary means of traveling through to the vaults. The doors of the facade were locked. There are other doors in the necropolis, however, that remain open. The extent of the construction in the necropolis was never fully documented or discussed, and the most wealthy men in the Merchants Guild, eager to build tombs that would serve their families for generations, as well as keep them safe from grave robbers, secretly dug deep down into the living earth to build colossal vertical vaults. These vaults can be accessed from certain surface-level mausoleums dotted around the graveyard. Simply look for the monuments that bear curious insignias that hint at hidden passages inside their stone crypts. The Egyptian vaults, for example, are decorated with upside-down torches with the flames still lit, hinting at a shaft that stretches down into the earth. Once inside, find the entrance. In most cases, this is as simple as sliding off the stone atop a tomb and climbing down into the vacant space below. In many cases, previous acolytes do not slide the stone lids back across once inside, hence the many mausoleums with disturbed crypts. The catacombs under the necropolis are dank, damp, and intensely claustrophobic. The air feels heavy and oppressive, and drawing breath is difficult in the deeper levels. The architecture of the vaults is difficult to maneuver. Some of the passageways are permanently flooded, some have collapsed inwards, and some were never finished at all. It is said the merchants who built the catacombs felt they had disturbed something deep down amidst the gloom. The catacombs are rarely silent. The rush of water is never far off, as the river above the vaults but below the streets continually flows down through the stone. The dim roar of distant, crumbling corridors occasionally punctuate even the dry corners of the vaults. In the dark, it is easy to imagine these roars as laments of the anguished dead who line the walls of the abyssal tombs. The acolyte that seeks the truth must venture into the water of the catacombs. There is no other way to access that secret that lies sleeping in the amniotic waters of the earth's womb. Danger is omnipresent. Damp clothing and strong currents can drag the acolyte under the surface forever. The roof or floors of passages may collapse and pin them down under rocks, soil, or water. Passages may suddenly flood, or air pockets fill up and disappear entirely. Only a few times must the acolyte dive below the surface of the water and swim down under a solid surface overhead. But these few airless moments in an area already starved of air is harrowing. The reward, however, lies at the end of a long, earthy tunnel with a strange, broken luminescence at the far end. The tunnel is littered with bloated, fleshy masses, the remains of previous acolytes who, looking towards the end of the tunnel and being gripped by fear, inadvertently took a breath of stale water. No air pockets exist in the tunnel. Only when the acolyte clears the tunnel and rises to the surface of the underwater lake they have swam into can they gasp for air. And gasp they inevitably will, for they will have been able to see that thing as they swam down the tunnel towards it, that thing that had so terrified the previous, failed acolytes. Deep in the lake, some way below the acolyte's feet, is a colossal entity of indistinct amphibian anatomy, sleeping with giant, stark white eyes wide open and staring, interminably still. Not even a bubble arises from it. It is impossible to tell if it is alive, or merely some work of unsurpassable craftsmanship. The eyes are dimly luminescent, providing the only light in the underwater cavern, but they barely illuminate the vast bulk of its body, which is visible only as a cyclopean murky shadow hanging in the center of the lake. Swimming towards it through the tunnel, the fear that comes with the sudden acknowledgement that the light at the far end is actually the gaze of something enormous towards you is nothing compared to the vulnerability you feel when treading water above it. Moving your arms or legs too quickly feels far too dangerous. The entity's stare is gripping. Even as small a gesture as glancing away from it seems like too much of a movement to make, too vital a defense to lower in front of its gigantic frame. And the acolyte who has found the truth must now turn away from the staring monstrosity, dive deep down in front of its unlit body, straight into the center of its unwavering sphere of vision, to swim back through the tunnel of the dead to the catacombs above, the weight of its gaze now, and forever, on the acolyte's back. 141. The phone network. Electromagnetic fields are often used to explain away bizarre phenomena that the human mind experiences. In particular, theory suggests that electromagnetic fields cause the feelings and hallucinations that conspire to create a ghost sighting. The two are linked, but it's the wrong way around. The phone network is made up of electrical signals masquerading as sound, so it should not be surprising that haunting phenomena occur on the phone lines as much as in decrepit castles and old houses. For this reason, many acolytes refuse to carry mobile phones, or else keep them turned off for extensive periods of time. A number of people in the region of Glasgow have experienced the screaming phone. Instead of the traditional ringing tone of their home telephones, the phones emit a high-pitched peal of electrical screams that tear into the heads of anyone unfortunate enough to hear them. Answering the phone will immediately cease the screaming, but it is far preferable to let the phone ring unanswered by simply waiting for the screams to end, or leaving the building altogether. The voice on the end of the line is always your own, and the secrets it delivers may lead to your own destruction. It is not uncommon for acolytes to receive text, picture messages and voicemails from unknown individuals that tease answers to the questions of Glasgow's living mythology. Pictures of a missing girl, a message detailing a severed hand with sticks of incense poking out through decaying flesh, a video of reflected lights in the sky, a voicemail message spoken by a vaguely familiar voice, pleading for you to show mercy, a photo taken through a watery lens of paintings bleeding color. It is pivotal that these are ignored unless their source is known. The acolyte that seeks the truth must seek the truth itself, and not false icons created in her name. Truth is the greatest temptress, and they know this well. 144. The Hidden Exhibition. On the grounds of the Glasgow Cathedral is a baronial brick building, the St. Mungo Museum of Religious Life and Art, opened in 1993. The museum is dedicated to showcasing works of art and artifacts dedicated to various world religions, and its displays are a wonder to behold in any circumstances. The huge bronze statue of Nataraja Shiva is as impressive as the Zen garden held within. Indeed, the entire museum is the embodiment of the oft held of differing religions coexisting peacefully, all with mutual respect, and it is free for anyone to see from Monday to Saturday. It is rumored there is one exhibition in the museum, however, that is off limits to anyone not authorized by an individual known as the Glasgow curator. To gain entry, you must first locate what the curator refers to as a living relic, any object that has some kind of bizarre, occult property. If you find one, ask an attendant at the museum to let you speak to the Glasgow curator and indicate that you have a relic that they will be interested in. You will be taken to the top floor of the museum and through a door marked No Unauthorized Entry into a small, stark white room. The room has one window opposite the way you come in, though nothing can be seen through it, as it seems an interminable, swirling white fog presses itself up against the glass, and one door, the one you entered through. In the center, behind an elaborate oaken desk sits a person of indeterminate gender, dressed head to toe in a white robe not unlike a burqa. The attendant will leave. The curator will beckon. You will present the relic. If the Glasgow curator is satisfied with the relic you have shown them, you will be allowed into the hidden exhibition, at the cost of giving up the relic, which will become part of the hidden exhibition itself. The curator will indicate for you to go to the foggy window, and you will see that there is no window at all, only an indeterminate space filled with dense whirlpools of white mist. Walking into the space causes the fog to coalesce around you, but only for a few moments, as the clouds soon disperse to reveal the room that hosts the hidden exhibition. The room is small, only 30 by 30 feet, and is paneled in dark brown wood, occasionally dotted by ornate brass vents. It is completely windowless and lacks any definitive light source. Shadows seem to lengthen, turn and contract independently of any stimulus. Incense burns away inside censers of porcelain shaped like rampant vegetative growth that stand from floor to ceiling in each of the four corners of the room, creating a heady, smoky and reverent air. Along each wall, and in the center of the room, are glass cases that contain various unusual items, with plaques that describe, in florid prose, the history and abilities of each item. Behold the hand of Mary Ann, a small, bloody, withered hand, most likely belonging to a child or young woman, wrapped in barbed wire, with fragments of crisp packets, refused sacks and polythene bags wreathed around it like a garland. It belonged to a girl martyred for her far from immaculate conception. Tapping the end of the bony, stiff index finger onto a person suffering from a virus or disease will cause the hand to incubate that virus or disease. Touching the broken pinky finger to another person will cause them to contract anything the hand is currently incubating. Observe the milk of Mary, a lush and verdant plant with ripe, fleshy fruits holding the breast milk of the Virgin Mary inside, which, when consumed, will burn away a person's sin proportionate to the volume drank. A single fruit, with a tablespoonful of silvery white milk, can be taken from the plant per person per year. Marvel at the eternal robin, a bird perched inside a cage of razor-sharp wires that fatally contract and slice the robin into pieces every hour on the hour, over the course of the following hour. Each slice of the bird's quartered body flutters, flits and springs back together to reconstitute its physical form anew, and as it does so, its croaking voice chirps the name of all the people in the city who will die that day. There are at least 14 objects in the hidden exhibition that describe, in their own visceral and aberrant way, the living history of Glasgow's occult underground, and by extension, the world. The exhibition rotates its displays every 33 days, and the Glasgow curator forbids anyone from removing objects from inside the hidden exhibition. Only once, albeit recently, has someone successfully managed to steal an object from the exhibition, and that object, a humble Gideon's Bible, has yet to resurface. 150. The parallel puzzle. There is a large communications tower in the east of the city that is home to an enigma that has gone unsolved for 30 years. Although the tower seems ordinary from the ground, climbing up the ladder to the uppermost point of the steel and wire construction will reveal a series of square foot-sized concave mirrors haphazardly tied down to metal struts and hidden away behind the huge television and satellite dishes at the apex of the tower. There is some give in the ropes that tie them down, which allow them to be rotated to face the city around them, or the sky above. Each of the mirrors seems to reflect a slightly different reality. The one reached first, also the largest, seems to reflect its surroundings accurately, but when angled towards the ground, it reveals a colossal, gaping pit in the ground below you. There's no trace of this chasm in the real world, but that doesn't mean it isn't there, and it certainly won't stop anything from climbing out of it. The two mirrors above the whole mirror are angled so that they only reflect the sky, or parts of each other. Oddly, they only ever show the night sky, and always as though there was no air or light pollution in the sky. However, the constellations that appear in the mirror are never visible in the sky. In fact, they've never been seen on Earth. The final mirror, placed at the tip of the tower, can swivel to point immediately above to the ground below. It's difficult to reach, as it requires stepping off of the secure metal struts of the tower and climbing up the smooth face of a satellite dish, which can easily mean falling to your death with a misplaced step or a mistimed jump. The last mirror is large enough for you to see all of yourself in it, and invariably, whenever you look into it, you will see yourself at the pinnacle of all you could have accomplished. This reflection looks like you would if you had strove to reach your potential, if you had done your utmost to succeed and took every opportunity before you. This is a false blessing. There is only so much pride you can share with this false reflection before you realize it will always be better than you in your current state, and with that acknowledgement comes frustration and anger. Perhaps that is why the mirror now lies broken. Someone simply did not like what they saw. In their anger, however, they have doomed us. In the 70s, before it was smashed, the light from the moon would filter down through the comm tower and into the large pit that is only visible as a reflection. This light would draw in all those things that hide in the shadowy parts of the city and force them down to the deeper consciousness of the city, keeping us safe. Now, the light is split and fragmented, and acolytes have thus far been unable to realign the light from the mirrors without something from the pit rising up to claim a new prize. 159. The Gatekeeper. In Malta Terrace, there is a statue made of bronze, hung from the roof of a block of flats that is known as the Gatekeeper. It is an androgynous robed figure with flowing hair and one palm outstretched as if giving benediction, that stares out at the Gorbals with vigilant eyes. Although a recent installation, it is already a prominent focal point in Glasgow's living mythology. In 2002, there were a number of thefts from the Hunterian Museum, and one of the objects stolen was a small, sealed jar. This was not reported to the public, as the object was part of a collection not exhibited in the museum. The sealed jar has a dire connection, however, as it is one of the artifacts held within the Gorbals plague cart, a monstrous contraption that supposedly led to an outbreak of plague in the city in 1900. The individual who stole the jar was intent on unleashing it again in the Gorbals, only for his ritual to fail completely. He had not counted upon the Gatekeeper, which bore the pain of the plague itself. The residents of the Gorbals marveled at a miracle in their very own neighborhood as they noticed that the statue had mysteriously acquired a stigmata-like wound in its outstretched palm. For as long as the Gatekeeper hovers above the streets, the Gorbals will be safe. In fact, the Gatekeeper can prevent harm coming to any area that it resides in. The only reason that it hasn't yet been stolen is that Islet Kinnaird, a powerful acolyte, lives in one of the nearby flats and uses it to safeguard her apartment block. 163. The Disharmony Gospel. In the northeast of Glasgow, there is a factory that, while not abandoned, has certainly seen far better days. Over the past few years, the staff have quartered, halved again, and so on until only 24 workers occupy the building, which is rapidly shrinking, as the management has begun to close off parts of the factory that will not see use again. Rusted iron grills lock away empty brick and steel corridors. Huge metal doors are welded shut. Entrances to shafts in the ground are bolted down. There is one area in the factory that has not been locked away, however, that holds a peculiar significance to acolytes. To gain entry, the acolyte must enter the building after 9 p.m. when the workers leave and only 2 area security officers remain on site. One of the exterior doors of the factory is marked with a piece of red electrical tape. This door is not monitored by cameras, and the security officers check it infrequently. The lock on the door has been partially broken, such that applying some force to the door will cause it to swing open, revealing a corridor inside. Remember to close the door behind you. The security staff already know something strange is happening inside the factory, but they can only remain in ignorance for as long as acolytes are careful. The corridors behind the door are loud. Colossal rumbling permeates every corner, accompanied by staccato of steam being released from pressurized valves in some far-off room. It is impossible to hear your own footsteps on the bare concrete floors. Dead rats tend to accumulate under the many electrical boxes and wires that bulge from the walls, but whatever has failed them is difficult to tell in the stark orange light of the corridors, thrown by dim, flickering wall lamps webbed with dust. The corridors are labyrinthine, and it is easy to get lost. However, there are pieces of red electrical tape marking certain paths at junctions throughout the hazy, blinking maze. Take the corridors with red tape over ones without every time. The acolyte may see other humanoid figures making their way through the dusky corridors out of the corner of their eyes. These are known as the gospel wardens, and it is imperative that the acolyte never cross their paths. Otherwise, all the lights blink out, and the wardens use the cover of darkness to do whatever it is they do to their captives. The lamps in the corridors immediately surrounding the acolyte will give an indication as to how close the gospel wardens are. When a warden is nearby and out of sight, the lights in the corridors around it grow brighter, buzz louder, and seem to flicker in a rhythmic breathing pattern. When the warden passes, the lights dim again, and the acolyte can continue moving. The acolyte's final step in their journey is a ladder fastened onto the wall of a dead end in the labyrinth, leading up to a hole with unsettling red light occasionally spilling from it. The acolyte must ascend the ladder, and they will find themselves standing in the central room, the chapel of disharmony. The metal room is swathed in stark, bright red light, its source impossible to define other than it coming from outside the room itself. Red strobes of light pulse through gaps in the steel plates stacked and welded together to make Urset's walls. Wire meshes break up the light into tendrils slipping through holes in the rusted ceiling. Aged but functional extraction fans built into nondescript steel chop up the beams of luminescence into bursts of red with their groaning blades, flooding the room with the taste of dust and iron. Red gushes out of the drilled holes in the steel floor, splashing over the walls, the ceiling, everything. The light never remains still, alternately illuminating the room in its harrowing bleed before throwing it back into darkness, all the while accompanied by the sound of the grating fan and murmurs of vibrating metal from every wall, the ceiling, and the floor. Even touching one of these surfaces produces a tingling throughout your body, its humming and buzzing somehow weakening the parts of yourself beyond your flesh. Spending a few minutes in the room can induce dull aches and pains throughout your body, especially noticeable in teeth with fillings, or any metal joints inside you. A few more, and the sickening vibration of the metal inside your flesh becomes nauseating. After a half hour, and the feeling of steel trying to rip itself out of you becomes intolerable. Propped up against one wall, however, is the acolyte's prize, the disharmony gospel, a stack of 6 by 5 feet rusted iron plates, each embossed with raised letters that list all the things that the acolyte has misremembered because it was just too strange, too bizarre, didn't fit, or they didn't want to deal with. The mysterious words whispered to them from in the dark space under the bridge by the river before they ran away in fright. The mental image of the bird with a human face that looked in their window at night. Their father's secret twin that lived in the cupboard. The woman that was running down Main Street one evening, before falling into her shadow and screaming all the way down, before the car headlights destroyed the shadow hole. Each event storms back into the acolyte's memory like a revelation, spurring them on to lift the huge, heavy plates so they can uncover the next metal page and use the intermittent strobes of red light to read the next set of forgotten apocrypha from their lives. The head made of soil they found in the garden cried when their brother smashed it with a brick. They lifted up a sewer cover and found a man inside, who smiled back at them before trying to grab them. The view from the neighbor's house into the nearby restaurant's kitchen, holding rows and rows of small bodies in huge basins of dull gray water. It is wise that the acolyte leave as soon as they have read their gospel, if not sooner. The flashes of red that illuminate the room occasionally cast light upon the holes in the walls, revealing oddly proportioned humanoid shapes, occasionally reflecting red light off of marred, black eyes that peer through as they pace around. Though the gospel wardens seem to be unable to get through the gaps between the steel plates that make up the walls, they have no trouble reaching the labyrinth of dimly lit corridors that separates the room and the exit of the factory, and they make it their mission not to have the acolyte escape with any knowledge gleaned from their gospel. 197. The Silent Man. An entity has entered the annals of urban myth under a number of names and guises. Glasgow, it is given the name San Shusami, a mocking title intended to discourage fear by laughing in the face of it. The name comes from the fact that it can move without making a sound, as though its shoes dampen the noise of its footsteps. This entity is given other names. Another common appellation is the still man, in the sense that the entity often brings with it a sense of foreboding stillness before it strikes, or that it makes very little movement in those rare moments where it is seen by an eyewitness. Irrespective of how appropriate this title is, it may be misapplied. German folklore refers to it as der Stillman, which can be translated to the silent man, referring back to its method of remaining completely quiet when stalking its victim. The silent man usually appears as a man dressed in dark-colored formal clothing, but for whatever reason, appears hazy and indistinct when viewed with the naked eye. Its facial features seem to blur into one another when viewed closely. According to most eyewitnesses, the silent man simply stands and stares, if it can be said to have eyes. The silent man will stalk its victims for any length of time before ultimately disposing of them. In areas where the silent man is seen, atrocities are inevitable. It is an omen of disaster. While eyewitness accounts of its actual behavior are lacking, it is obvious from the aftermath of its appearances that it is capable of severely mutilating its victims. The most common artifact discovered after an encounter with him are a number of canopic bags, fleshy containers that hold each of the victim's individual organs and body parts. The face bag tends to be left behind most often.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.